listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
We've actually got Sir Angus Scott on the mother of all talk shows this evening. Well, he's not quite yet Sir Angus Scott, but he should be, because he's the man that may have stopped the grotesque, ugly blunder made by Buckingham Palace in knighting at the highest possible level of knights, the darkest of knights, Sir Tony Blair. Yes, he's the man that tabled the petition, which is now well over 1 million signatures strong. We'll be looking at Ghislaine Maxwell. Will she get a retrial? Does she deserve one? Was it all a setup in the first place? And we'll be talking about Kazakhstan, where there is blood in the streets, in the snow. The question is, was this a genuine upsurge of popular protest over the doubling from 13 cents to 30 cents a litre of LPG? Or is this an ISIS Al-Qaeda inspired regime change operation backed by the usual subjects? You can guess which of these two takes that I take. It's going to be the mother of all talk shows tonight. Get your calls in early, because this is rock and roll radio with pictures.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Sir Angus Scott is a compatriot of mine, I infer from his name. I've never spoken to him, never met him. I had no part in the tabling of his petition, which was launched immediately that the news was deliberately smuggled out just before the bells on Hogmanay that Tony Blair was going to be elevated to the highest echelon of knighthood, a member of the Royal Garter. Angus Scott beat me to it. I was still writing my petition, and I'm glad that he did, because coming from him, a person on the opposite side of politics, to me, has been able to garner support across all of the parts of the political spectrum in a way that a petition tabled by me might not have as effectively been able to do. So I'm only interested in the outcome of actions, not the credit for them. But I have to give credit to this man, who's not a politician, has never been involved in politics, but who found the right moment and the right words to table on change.org, and he has produced a miracle. Well over 1 million people. You remember I had a dream last week. I spoke about it in my monologue last week, about how we had to get to 1 million. It was a dream. But actually, on Friday, we passed the 1 million mark. Surely the fastest $1 million, million signature petition ever. And it's still growing and growing and growing. There it is, change.org. We still need your signatures because, well, we had well over 1 million in the Million Man Woman March on February 15, 2003, against the war. So we ought to be able to do even better than that, given that a whole generation of people in Britain could not have been on that march, and indeed could not have known what they know now, that the war was based on a pack of lies. This is very important. Her Majesty the Queen has somehow been induced to give the highest possible award to a man who lied to her armed forces, lied to her parliament, lied to her people. about the need for a war, an invasion and occupation of Iraq. Quite apart from the fact that 1 million people lie in the cold earth this evening that might otherwise have been alive if this liar had not hoodwinked everyone, except those of us who stood against him, into an illegal and utterly pointless and absolutely counterproductive invasion and occupation of Iraq. 1 million Iraqis, British soldiers, American soldiers, soldiers from other nationalities. And then there's the matter of cascading ISIS and Al-Qaeda around the world. How many other lives has that cost? How much more blood has that spilled? And as I frequently point out, we haven't reached the bottom yet, not by a long chalk. The lives of the youngest person in your household will still be affected, will still develop under a cloud in the deformation of the world that this liar and his war has caused into human society. It has extremized, fanaticized some of the worst elements in the world. It has got people, their throats cut, their heads cut off. It has got hundreds of thousands of dead people around the world in the name of an Islamist fanaticism, the oxygen for which was provided by the imbecile George W. Bush and his brain, Tony Blair. Don't expect me to call him Sir Tony, Your Highness. I think that his crime in Iraq should have led him to a trial at the tribunal in The Hague for war crimes and crimes against humanity. But even, Your Majesty, if you can't accept that, you have to face this fact. This man and his grisly missus carefully cheated Her Majesty's Treasury out of hundreds of thousands of pounds in the property transaction relating to the Marylebone affair revealed in the Pandora Papers. This man's attitude to the City of London, along with Gordon Brown, led to the crash in 2008, the reverberations from which also have never stilled. We have been living in austerity for 13 long years because Tony Blair and his friend Bill Clinton decided on the lightest of touches when it came to the regulation of the banking industry. There are so many other examples I could give, Your Majesty. Now, I realize this is really a pickle you're in now. What are you going to do now that you have granted this mass killer this high honor? I appreciate that it's difficult for you, even when 1 million of your subjects have beseeched you to in this petition, and many, many more still will do so. It's difficult for you to find a way out. But if you're looking for a way out, Your Majesty, the thing to do is to get Tony Blair to decline the honor. If he was a man at all, of course, he'd already have declined it. Look at the embarrassment, excruciating shame that he's brought on you and your house over this honor. If he had any scintilla of decency about him, he would already have declined it. The problem is he has no such scintilla. So you'll have to let it be known to him by one means or another, preferably by many, that he now has to decline this honor, because we will not back down, Your Majesty. We have come far in a week with well over 1 million people behind us, and we will not back down. We will blockade Buckingham Palace rather than allow this war criminal through those gates to be knighted by you. And that would be a terrible end to your long reign, would it not, Your Majesty? It would be a terrible start for your heir and successor, would it not, Your Majesty? This is going to discolour everything about your reign if it ends in this ignominy of hundreds of thousands of us in the Mall blockading Buckingham Palace because you decided to honour a war criminal, a liar, a mountebank. Now, we have been saved these last 14 years by your late husband. If it were not for the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, Tony Blair would have got this knighthood many years ago. He didn't get it because your husband had the common sense to know that the British people would not look kindly on such an action from the monarch. Sadly, for all of us, Prince Philip is no longer with us. And somebody, I'd like to know who, has prevailed upon you to do what Prince Philip would never have countenanced you doing. It's not too late, Your Majesty, but it's getting late. And you now have to act. Because don't imagine that this mountebank, this con man, this actor-manager, Tony Blair, is going to withdraw from this imbroglio with any dignity of his own volition. So we'll be talking about that, I'm sure, in the court. In fact, we've got a poll running now. Should Tony Blair decline the knighthood to save the Queen's blushes? Get voting on that, please, on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram channel. There are other issues. Of course, I've just finished recording a special podcast on the Maxwells and my part in Robert Maxwell's downfall with our editor, Ron Mackay, whose pension was stolen by the aforementioned Robert Maxwell. It's a fascinating tale. It'll be out in a week, 10 days or so. And of course, our normal podcast is still breaking all records, charting in all kinds of places. But the Ghislaine Maxwell verdict looked like the vindication of these poor girls that were trafficked and raped by some of the ugliest, vilest men on the planet. But lo and behold, a legal loophole has emerged, which may lead to a retrial and may lead to a different verdict. At least that's the hope of those who harboured Ghislaine Maxwell for so many decades, even after her role in the child trafficking and rape of Jeffrey Epstein must have been abundantly obvious. We'll be talking to a woman who's known Ghislaine Maxwell for 20 years about the Ghislaine Maxwell that she knew. And we'll be talking to RT UK's finest. Afshin Rattansi is the best analyst on British television, never mind on RT. In a sane world, he'd be standing in for Andrew Marr now that Marr has slung his hook. He'd be the preeminent political chat show host, news anchor in the country, but he's not. But he is drawing record audiences for Going Underground on RT UK. And I'll be talking to him about the extraordinary events in Kazakhstan, a place I know quite well. The last time I was there, the former head of the CIA was trying to force his way into my hotel bedroom in Almaty in the middle of the night, with my wife in her nightdress and me pushing on the door as he pushed as hard as he could to get into our hotel room. The former head of the CIA. He said he was sleepwalking. Who am I to doubt the word of a former head of the CIA? But I'll tell you what, the Americans didn't stop pushing their way into Kazakhstan then. And what you are seeing on the streets of Almaty and Nur Sultan and across the country is the fruits of another Ukrainian-style regime change operation, another so-called colour revolution. But they didn't bargain for a couple of things. First of all, having experienced the Ukrainian disaster, the neighbours of Kazakhstan are not prepared to see Kazakhstan turned into a new Ukraine. And they have collectively come together in the CSTO, Common Security Treaty Organization. And they have, as they are legally obliged to do, flooded their armed forces into Kazakhstan to defeat the terrorist onslaught there. I'll tell you what the West has in mind. And you don't have to look in the crystal ball. You just have to look at the last decade in Syria. Once again, the West is deploying the head-chopping Islamist mass murderers to try and destabilize and, if possible, replace the regime in Kazakhstan with a regime that will break relations with both Russia and China and allow itself to be used as the tunnel to burrow further into the territories of both. Much more also on top of that. So you better stay tuned, I promise you. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
We asked you to help the podcast reach the magic number of 100 countries. I'm unusually proud of this, as you may be able to tell. And you answered the call. South Korea and Moldova took us over the hill, with the Moats podcast now downloaded in 101 countries. Little old us in 101 countries. So if you're not already listening to this genuinely worldwide sensation, then please subscribe so you can listen to Moats anywhere, anytime, from every corner of the earth. It's the distilled version of this show, shorn of all the peripheral material. Just pure Moats, 90 minutes instead of 3 hours. So if you do it and you love it, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're a Spotify user, please follow us and let us see when the next record broken will be.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Now, I mentioned earlier about the podcast. We've got the special Maxwell podcast coming out, but we've also got some big news. I don't know if Simon is ready to deliver it yet, on the weekly podcast. Truly extraordinary. I told you that we are #1 in Zimbabwe. We're now also charting in places like Qatar and in Oman. We are reaching more and more countries and territories throughout the world. It is the biggest success story I have ever been involved in, and I have been involved in a few. Should Tony Blair decline the knighthood to save the Queen's blushes? A, yes, 85%. B, no, 15%. And that's on Twitter. On YouTube, yes, he should decline it. 86% say our YouTube viewers, and 96% say our Telegram viewers. It's always a better political class of people on the Telegram channel. At least they usually agree with me in even more overwhelming numbers. But you can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram. Now, the phone numbers, I'm sure you're going to want to have your say. If you're in the United Kingdom, you can call completely free on 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. If you're in the United States or Canada, it's also completely free to call the show. It's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. You can also email the show anytime. On air at moats.tv. Now, let's take a call on the Blair Knighthood from Cardiff. Matthew, welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thank you, George, for having me. Well, it's a lovely pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
I'd just like to say, George, regarding Tony Blair, I agree with basically everything you said. The guy was a warmonger, should never be awarded knighthood. But it's just occurred to me that I've been informed that Tony Blair actually took a shed load of furlough off the government. Is that true, George? Do you know?
Well, according to the newspapers, him and his grisly wife took £85,000 in furlough payments from the government. This despite the fact that they are in possession of a £100 million fortune and are guarded round the clock at the taxpayers' expense by no fewer than 27 members of the special branch of the Metropolitan Police, paid for by us, the taxpayer. That's a rotation number, but in the course of any one day, we're paying 27 armed officers to protect these people. They've got £100 million. They've got more than 30 houses. And they're applying for £80,000 worth of furlough. I think that says it all about them, Matthew.
Yeah, I totally agree. Absolutely. No, I didn't even know that. That's blown my mind even further. This is just another reason why people should get on this petition and get it stopped, George.
Exactly. Get on the petition. If in the unlikely event you're watching me, but you haven't yet signed, go to the petition on change.org. It's very important that you do. We've got over 1 million in less than a week. Imagine if we could get hundreds of thousands more, and that petition kept on growing. And I'll be organized. I promise you this. Even if I'm there alone, I'll be outside Buckingham Palace trying to stop the war criminal entering those gates to be knighted. If I can, I'll try and make a citizen's arrest upon him for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Take careful note. That's what I'll be doing. I don't know who will be with me. But maybe some of you will be with me. Matthew's with me. Are you with me? Tell me, are you with me outside the gates of Buckingham Palace? If Blair does not decline this knighthood, we will be there in our thousands to try and stop him from achieving it. Matthew, thanks for the call. Fabrice is in France on Blair. Go ahead, Fabrice.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. Great show as usual. Love the hot content. It's very good.
Thank you.
Just two points I'd like to mention. The first is regarding last week you mentioned about Hitler. You said he was vegan, but he was kind to animals, but that doesn't make him a good person, and I fully agree with that. Mm-hmm. Just like to point out, though, that he wasn't vegan, and they say he was vegetarian, but he wasn't even vegetarian, in fact, because he used to eat white sausage, weiße Wurst, in places like Munich.
Well, I apologize to the vegan and even vegetarian community if I have wrongly included Hitler in their ranks. The point I was trying to make is,
I understand the point.
This is the greatest mass murderer in history.
I agree. No, I agree. I agree with the point that you were making. I just think that in the detail it was wrong. And as far as
you're quite right to point out, white sausage is definitely not vegan,
like
not vegan material.
And not vegetarian either, but like the Dalai Lama, who's vegetarian every second day. So,
my daughter was vegetarian for I think 4 hours. She gave it up after 4 hours, but she had earnest intentions back then. Fabrice, how's the situation in France on Tony Blair? Do they ever think about him? What have they been saying about this knighthood?
That would be a very... Actually, I couldn't tell you. Even though I live in France, I don't follow French politics that closely.
Because France saved its honour by refusing to join this war. And the much maligned Jacques Chirac maintained the dignity and honour of France and the French by refusing.
And who was it? The Schröder? Was it the German?
Also, Gerhard Schröder, the German Chancellor. They both refused to participate.
So I fully agree with it.
And yet we still kept, I mean, the narrative of that time, Fabrice, was that this was the West, the international community, that was invading Iraq.
No,
that was the West
we all know.
minus France and Germany. It was the international community minus China, India, Russia, France, Germany, and 100 other countries.
No. I was against that at the time, and you were as well, and Schröder was, and Chirac was, but they didn't listen. They wanted to go in no matter what. So, and
it was all planned in advance. Go ahead quickly, Fabrice.
And the second point was regarding the Queen. Now, I was speaking to someone last night about Tony Blair having this knighthood betrothed upon him by the Queen, and I was told, I mean, this person is a relation of mine living in England, that the Queen doesn't choose. She is given a list, and she has to choose from the list, but it's not actually the Queen's decision who gets put on the list, or there are two lists. But this, and I said, well, what about Tony Blair? I said I listened to you. I mentioned your name, of course, and I said I listened to George Galloway, and I'm under the impression that she can choose. She does have the power to put his name, to keep his name on the list or not. And this is a relation of mine was quite convinced that it's not the Queen's.
I wish it were so, Fabrice, because it was not my intention to be drawn into a confrontation with the Queen because of her long service and grey age and poor state of health by all accounts. But I'm afraid it isn't true. I'm afraid it isn't true. It's the one honour of them all. Only she
can decide. So she can or she cannot decide. She can decide.
She can. Indeed, she's the only person who can. It's the one honour for which she is personally entirely responsible. It was
on that
her
list,
choice
she gets given the list by the Prime Minister.
There was no list.
There's no list. Where does his name come from?
There's only 24 people in the Order of the Garter.
Of the Garter,
and a vacancy occurred, and she nominated Tony Blair for it. She nominated. She the Queen. I wish it were otherwise, believe me.
Yeah. But you're sure about it.
I'm 100%.
You're absolutely sure.
I'm 100%
I said this
sure.
to my relation, and she said, she's just an average person like me, and she said, no, George Galloway is wrong. He's probably wrong.
I'm sorry, I'm not. I wish I was, but I'm not.
Me too.
Rafik, thank you, Fabrice.
Thank
we
you.
go from France to French-speaking Canada, Montreal, to talk with Rafik. Rafik, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, George Galloway.
Welcome. Go ahead, sir.
All right, so I have several issues to talk about regarding this knighthood. It goes into a very short... I'm going to be as brief as possible. The history is very interesting behind the royal family's illegitimacy. First, of course, as we both know, Tony Blair is indeed a war criminal, and he has committed so many atrocities in so many countries, and he has been corrupt in so many ways at home as well. Yet the even bigger scandal that people will have to know is that the House of Windsor, as probably you might know, wasn't called Windsor before 1917, and the 1701 Settlement Act actually banned all traditional forms of succession in Britain and Ireland. So essentially, it is indeed, the real name is Saxe-Gotha-Coburg, and it came into place from Saxony in Germany. It went to Britain, and it kind of usurped its way into power, essentially. And it broke away with all traditional British forms of royal succession and Irish forms of royal succession. And it brings into mind now that whilst this illegitimate royalty governs, on top of that, it names a war criminal to its highest knighthood.
Well, powerful stuff. The Saxe-Coburg details that you gave are true. I think that Saxe-Coburg was 57th in line to the throne. But helpfully, he was a Protestant, and the other 56 were Roman Catholics. And that's how he came to be the King of Britain. I don't myself like to go down the Byzantine corridors of ancient history in these matters. If I could change the rule of succession, I'd say give us Anne. Princess Anne is the best of the royal family by a long chalk. I'd actually support Queen Anne, good Queen Anne, if they would change the rules of succession. I will not support, without a fight, the idea that Prince Charles will succeed Her Majesty the Queen. I will fight for a referendum in this country on the constitutional future of our country, including the monarchy and the House of Lords and the honours system. And I think I'm wrong about that, according to Grace in London. Let's hear. Grace, why am I wrong? Grace?
Oh, hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yeah, George. I was just ringing to let you know that it won't be Buckingham Palace where Tony Blair's knighted. It's going to be Windsor Castle. And it will be on Monday, the 13th of June.
Well, we must all put that in our diary right now. Well, Monday, the 13th of June at Windsor Castle. That'll be a fun day out.
Exactly. I just wanted to make sure you got the
weather will be
address.
nicer too.
Yeah, it would be great, won't it? We can take a picnic with us.
Monday, the 13th of June. Please, everyone put that in their diary now. Grace, thank you for gracefully pointing out my error. It would be a fantastic boost if we could all descend on the beautiful town of Windsor. Coming up shortly, we've got Conchita Sarnoff. A long time she has known Ghislaine Maxwell, and I just wondered how she was feeling about the conviction, the imminent sentencing, and the possibility that there'll have to be a retrial. And Conchita joins us now. Conchita, wonderful to see you again. Thanks for coming back. You helped us a lot in the past, talking about Ghislaine Maxwell, understanding the Epstein case. You've known Maxwell for 20 years. Were you terribly surprised at what you learned in court?
Well, first of all, Happy New Year, George.
And to you, my dear.
Thank you for having me on your show. And thank you very much for your interest in this very important case, or cases, may I say, because there are several cases pending beside Ghislaine's. Was I surprised? To answer your first question is, I was not surprised, particularly in light of the 3 jurors who have since confessed that they did not tell the truth in their jury application, as you might know. I was not surprised about the witnesses' testimony, particularly Carolyn Andrade's, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And I was not surprised at the way that the case unfolded and that there is a possibility of a mistrial. I said that before. I, in fact, spoke to Emily Maitlis, who interviewed Prince Andrew in that infamous interview. And I said to her, Ghislaine, there might be a mistrial if she's ever taken to court for many reasons. But the most important reason, George, I believe, is that there is a lot of money exchanging hands, and there are a lot of politicians, establishment figures implicated in the case. As you know, there was no plea deal offered by the prosecution to Ghislaine, which is unusual. I mean, it does happen, but it is unusual. So is there going to be a plea deal now? If there is a mistrial, which given the 3 jurors' confessions seems highly likely. Will Ghislaine be able to buy her time by pointing fingers if she hasn't done so already? My fear with Ghislaine is exactly the same fear, not that I think, well, let me rephrase that. When Epstein was arrested, 3 days after he was arrested, an active FBI agent told me that he would not make it to trial. And he said to me, quote, "There are towels on the inside," which I didn't quite understand what he meant. I did later. And I believe this time round, as I told former Attorney General Barr, that if Ghislaine points fingers and decides to reveal all, she might not make it either. She is in jail. She is in the custody of the Bureau of Prisons. And lots of things can happen.
Very powerful and chilling stuff, Conchita. Let's walk it back for a minute, because not everyone will be as aware as you and I are about what the grounds for a mistrial would be. If I summarize them thus, it turns out that there are 3 people who were on the jury who not only had themselves been victims of child sexual abuse, which goes to show just how prevalent child sexual abuse is, something you know in your work, coming to the aid of children and young people that are trafficked. But not only were the 3 jurors victims of child sexual abuse, they ticked a box on their jury form to say that they were not, had never been victims of child sexual abuse. That's a standout for a retrial, isn't it?
Absolutely. 1 is a standout. 3, most definitely.
I wonder, Conchita, if this was entirely an accident, or if somehow it was contrived.
George, that is the billion-dollar question. And I don't wish to speculate at this moment, because too many things are happening behind the scenes. So perhaps we can talk a little bit later. But I do need to say that, and I want to make this clear, when I first broke open the case in 2010, and I spoke to Brad Edwards, who was the attorney who originally represented Virginia Roberts-Giuffre, which, by the way, I'm very puzzled that she was not called in as a witness, even though, of course, the prosecutors have every right not to call her as a witness, because it's their case and they evidently believed that they had a slam dunk case. So there was no need, based on what they believed was an open and shut case, to call Virginia Roberts-Giuffre. However, if you read one of the victims' testimony, she told her story to the Daily Mail, Carolyn, who went by the name of Carolyn during the trial, and she was a witness. And because of her testimony, 4 out of 5 counts of child sex trafficking were obviously won, right? She was found guilty. So Carolyn claims that Virginia told her back in 2001 that she had a photograph of her meeting Prince Andrew. And she also told her that Virginia told her in 2001 that she had sexual relations with the prince. And it was Virginia who sued Maxwell to begin with in September of 2015, right before the 2016 presidential elections. And it was also the year that David Boies, unheard of, would take on the case of a victim such as Virginia. Now, I can tell you the backstory offline, but the point is, all this is tied together. And I think today's report, Carolyn's report and Carolyn's story, is going to shed a very important light on the relationship and why Virginia was not called in as a witness, why perhaps there's going to be a mistrial, perhaps, and how this is going to move forward. And what are the repercussions in this case? Because there are many. And as you know, Jean-Luc Brunel, who was the third key procurer, using his modeling agency MC Squared, he is now sitting in a Paris prison awaiting trial as well. So there are many dangling elements to this case.
Yes, indeed. Now, she'll remain in prison.
Yes.
She will be sentenced unless the mistrial is declared peremptorily in advance of the sentencing, which I suppose might be possible, but it's quite likely that she'll be sentenced. She'll remain in prison. She won't get bail because all the reasons for not granting her bail remain extant. So your theory is that maybe that would be the time that the state, the prosecutor, would offer a plea bargain. For that plea bargain to be credible, it would still have to involve her spending many years behind bars, wouldn't it, Conchita?
Well, I would presume, again, this is a presumption, I would presume it would, because as you know, under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is the federal law, the statute that would put Ghislaine behind bars, a mandatory minimum is 20 years. So at least 20 years under TVPA, which is the reason I wrote the book, the reason I followed the case, the reason I have spent 11 years following this case very closely, because there are three things that we need to understand that I hope you, George, and the rest of your colleagues make this visible. One, TVPA and your UK laws equivalent to TVPA must be enforced across all jurisdictions. So number two, this is no longer an emerging markets issue, which is what everyone thought of back in 2010, that this was just poor criminals trafficking children. No, you now have rich men and financial institutions that enable the very rich to continue and to create and to facilitate child sex trafficking operations. That's very important. And number three, that child sex trafficking is a billion-dollar global industry. And those were the three reasons I wrote the book, the three reasons I continue to follow this case, and the reasons that this has become my life mission, because we must together stop child sex trafficking.
Amen. The book that you've written, the work that you're doing is truly magnificent. But let me just pick up one point that you made. This is not poor criminals trafficking children. This is rich men and women, we now can say, in the case of Maxwell. But not just rich men and women trafficking children, but trafficking them for other rich men and women, and powerful men and women. After all, one of the great unanswered questions of the Ghislaine Maxwell affair surely is that, was she pimping for Epstein alone? Was she trafficking for Epstein alone? Or were all these rich and powerful men who swarmed over the townhouses and the ranches and the islands because they were so drawn to the magnetic personality of Jeffrey Epstein, were they also involved in this sordid criminal enterprise? Were they the end users?
Amen. And all of that and all your questions are going to be answered in my upcoming book, Buried Secrets. So you will learn the answers to all your questions in that upcoming book.
When is that book coming out?
Hopefully by the end of this year, or by the fall of 2022.
Okay, I look forward very much to interviewing you, Conchita, when publication comes along. Meanwhile, I'm extremely grateful to you for joining us this evening, as I was on the previous occasions that you did so. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining me. Now, camera 4, you say. This is the week in 1999 that the TV series The Sopranos debuted. Where was it set? The Sopranos. Possibly the greatest television series ever made? Quite possibly. Maybe second place to the Americans. This was the week in 1999 that the TV series The Sopranos debuted. Where was it set? A, New York, B, New Jersey, or C, Miami? Answers after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda, but we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
As any fool knoweth, The Sopranos was set in New Jersey. It was a very New Jersey kind of gig. The one and only Afshin Rattansi joins me now, the host of Going Underground, the best political program on British television, never mind on RT. RT's very own Afshin Rattansi joins me to talk about events in Kazakhstan. Afshin, thank you for giving up your downtime.
Thank you for inviting me.
You work all the time here, and now you're joining me when you're relaxing at home. I'm grateful. The events in Kazakhstan could alternately be seen as embittered and unequal citizens of Kazakhstan, a post-Soviet state ruled by an oligarchy with grossly unequal distribution of wealth, not just between rich and poor, but between north and south and different sectors of the community. Or it could be what the Kazakh government say it is, a regime change operation launched by the West, or it could be both. Where do you stand?
It could be both. And you started the show off, as you often do, with the number of audiences that Moats, mother of all talk shows, goes out to in the United States, but to the global south. So I suppose for your American audience, who may be wondering, why should we even be bothered about Kazakhstan? It is, of course, because it threatens world stability. It also, again, addressing the American audience of this show, if some of those listening or watching are amongst those 40 million who cannot eat tonight without federal aid, they may be wondering why there were jobs in Kazakhstan, courtesy of the National Endowment for Democracy. People watching can see the banner here. There are lots of jobs recently. $50,000 for International Bureau of Human Rights that the U.S. taxpayer, U.S. public money was going to, democratic ideas and values. What were all these National Endowment for Democracy jobs paid for by the U.S. public money going for to Kazakhstan in recent years? What was Tony Blair, who I know, I call him Sir Tony Blair, unlike you, of course, was advising the dictator of Kazakhstan? What exactly is this story about? Because now all we hear about is how evil Kazakhstan is. The dichotomy you asked me about in this question is central. And I think what we see here, based on the evidence so far, is, again, we have a developing world leader, Pacha Gaddafi, Assad, who cozied up to the West, and the West have double-crossed him. And therefore, we have to be very, very worried about what may lie in store for Kazakhstan.
Although Russia and Armenia and Belarusia and the other members of the CSTO, they acted so quickly and so powerfully. I wouldn't, if this was a regime change operation, My betting is that for now it's failed. The problem will be if they have a Syria scenario in mind, if they're going to fund terrorism on a slow burn in this most combustible of areas. Do you think that might be what they've got in mind?
I mean, again and again, isn't it? Since, in fact, the 20th anniversary of 9/11 last year, more and more commentators came out of the woodwork saying they know very little in the State Department. Antony Blinken, famous for his support of the Libyan catastrophe on the Mediterranean, if they are going to try the ISIS-Daesh model again, and people who are surprised to learn that the United States and Britain and NATO were supporting ISIS-Daesh and al-Qaeda in Syria. There's lots of it on the internet, and lots of, I think, peer-reviewed political papers now that demonstrate that. You're right, George. Obviously, China and Russia border Kazakhstan. They're not going to be hoodwinked again the way they were over Libya, especially given how important Kazakhstan is to Russia and to China. And the idea, maybe somewhere in the vaults of the State Department or at Langley at the CIA, that they can hit Ukraine this week, because let's not forget they're meeting in Geneva today. This week's a big week, meeting in Vienna, the Organization of Security and Council in Europe. Big meetings this week where Blinken and Stoltenberg of NATO are going to threaten Russia with, well, if some of the briefings are to be believed today, all-out war, World War III, if they think they can do that on one flank and Kazakhstan on the eastern flank, I don't think Beijing and Moscow are going to have any of it.
No, that's right. I mean, they tried in the first 48 hours to question the right of the CSTO partners to intervene in this way, when in fact it's not a right but an obligation, a treaty obligation, rather like NATO has treaty obligations of joint cooperation and defense. Then they tried to say China will not be happy about Russia and Armenia and Belarus going in there, until China said, we're very happy with it. We have as much to lose from instability on the Eurasian plain than Russia does. So if they are going to achieve it, it's going to have to be through the Islamist path. Now, several of the Kazakh policemen have already been beheaded. The government of Kazakhstan at least claims that many of those arrested are Arabic speakers, in other words, have come in, perhaps from Syria, through the Central Asian republics, and have entered Kazakhstan as part of a carefully planned operation. What say you?
Yeah, these movements have been occurring. I mean, look at the conflict in Azerbaijan, Armenia last year, where there were reports, credible reports, that there were Islamists previously backed, presumably from London and Washington, entering Azerbaijan to fight with Armenia. We are relying on Kazakh authorities for the beheadings, and one has to say, condolences I'm sure, from both of us for the reported more than 160 dead, and let alone fears of the genuine working classes of Kazakhstan who've been demonstrating against the elites, whose money, actually, of the Kazakh authorities is probably here in London.
It's probably here in London.
People, it's all the money's over here. Surprising you don't. I mean, of course, if money really talks, there may be elite interests who are worried as well about Antony Blinken and Joe Biden thinking they can start this war and employ ISIS, Daesh in this way, thus destabilizing financial interests. But you mentioned earlier about Beijing and Moscow. I mean, already, if you're going to watch NATO nation media, the state-mandated British Broadcasting Corporation here, or, you know, read The Economist magazine or something, immediately it is, oh, well, this is terrible for Moscow-Beijing relations. I mean, I'm sure you know better.
They know better now. But that's why your comparison with Gaddafi and others was so apposite, because as it happens, and I know this personally, as it happens, over the last couple of years, the regime and the oligarchs in Kazakhstan have been trying to distance themselves from Russia and cozy up further to the West. As you say, much of their money and property and their visits to the bordellos and the casinos and so on is already here. The oligarchy is a big customer of the West so far as banking and luxury goods and so on is concerned. So just like Gaddafi made a turn to the West and then the West literally stabbed him in the back, that's what would appear now to have happened to the Kazakh rulers.
Yeah, these elite interests in global South countries, in developing nation countries, they never seem to learn, do they? But of course, it poses a difficulty. We know the way that Beijing always likes to say it will never interfere in the political processes. So the real working classes of Kazakhstan are going to get no help from Beijing. And Moscow is going to just try and restore order and then maybe leave them to it, rather like in Belarus. So given the gross human rights violations of the Kazakh regime, again, how do the ordinary Kazakh people get through their being used as proxies, being hijacked by Islamist causes so beloved of NATO? It's a terrible time for the Kazakh, 20 million Kazakh population. Let's hope at least this will completely put a stop to any neoliberal processes that were being started by the elites in Kazakhstan.
That's exactly why they increased the petrol price, albeit from a very low 13 cents a litre to 32 cents a litre for LPG. But they were doing that to please the World Bank and the IMF and the dictates of those who say that we can only support free market economies. And Kazakhstan better stop all these subsidies and public ownership of various services and institutions.
And it goes even further, doesn't it? Yugoslavia. I mean, we saw when bin Laden's friends were trading in Bosnia. I mean, this is the playbook, as we know, along with the National Endowment for Democracy. And Beijing is even more aware, obviously, because of the Uyghur situation that will again be flooding the headlines for the Winter Olympics in a few weeks' time, all the so-called human rights abuses. I'm not happy about this shoot-to-kill policy by the Kazakh government. But what does Antony Blinken think, or Joe Biden think, happens in Guantanamo Bay, where they torture people and where the world seems to have forgotten about? What gives the right of Washington to talk about human rights, or NATO countries with their black sites to ever talk about human rights in Kazakhstan, given their record of, and of course you alluded to this earlier, because of Britain and Sir Keir Starmer honouring Sir Tony Blair, tens of millions wounded, killed or displaced. There is no right by Jens Stoltenberg or any leader that supported these wars to talk about human rights in Kazakhstan, let alone in Xinjiang, let alone, of course, in Russia.
Afshin Rattansi, thank you for helping us, and I've no doubt there will be calls on this matter. Stay tuned. Afshin Rattansi of Going Underground on RT. I think it's time for the news, but I can give you the phone number. The British phone number is 08081 965522. The American phone number is +1 844 944 3344. You can email the show anytime, onair@moats.tv, or you can tweet, of course, at George Galloway, at RT UK. We'll be going live to Gaza. Can you believe it? Hope the phone lines are operating to speak to the wonderful Gadi Francis. And we'll be talking to the hero of the hour, Sir Angus Scott, after the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
A senior British cabinet minister has called for the UK to show the rest of the world how to move from pandemic to endemic, as he suggested it would be helpful to cut the isolation period to 5 days to ease workforce shortages. The Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, played down suggestions that the government was imminently about to start charging for free rapid lateral flow COVID tests, which would lead to fewer infections in the community being caught. But he said the ultimate aim was to move to a position where COVID was endemic in the UK and the country had learned how to live with the virus. Zahawi also said the government's health experts and scientists were looking at whether it would be possible to move from asking people to isolate for just 5 days after a positive test, rather than the current 7 days, recently cut from 10. The boss of one of London's busiest hospitals has said he is worried about losing staff when new rules come in requiring them to be vaccinated. From April, frontline NHS staff in England will need to have the COVID jab or will be moved to another role. King's College Hospital Chief Clive Kay said his job was to encourage workers to get jabbed, and 10% of his 14,000 staff were still unvaccinated. The government's Nadhim Zahawi defended the policy as the right thing to do. From the start of April, under law, NHS staff in England who have direct face-to-face contact with patients will need to have been vaccinated against COVID. A similar policy has already been brought in for staff working in social care in England, with care homes warning it has worsened the staffing crisis. The NHS is already facing a severe lack of staff and is short of about 93,000 workers. The Labour Party has called for a windfall tax on North Sea gas and oil producers to help limit the expected rise in household gas and electricity bills by £200. The party says its £6.6 billion plan would also remove VAT on domestic energy costs for a year and increase the warm homes discount for poorer households. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said the UK was uniquely exposed to global energy price rises, but the government said it was working to manage the impact on consumers. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson has not ruled out taking steps to tackle the rising cost of energy amid pressure from some of his own backbench MPs. The trade body Energy UK predicts bills will surge by up to 50% in April when the change to the price cap, due to be determined in February, kicks in. This could leave an average household paying around £700 more per year, it says. The Australian government did not tell Novak Djokovic that his so-called medical exemption would allow him to enter the country to compete in the Australian Open, court documents claim. On Sunday, the government filed 13 pages of documents ahead of a hearing to decide whether the Serbian tennis star can remain in the country or be departed. It also challenged Djokovic's claims that he had a COVID infection at the end of last year. The Australian government has said in the documents that even if Djokovic is successful in the hearing tomorrow, it may block his entry to the country anyway. The hearing is due to start at 10 a.m. on Monday morning, 11 p.m. Sunday UK time, after a request by the Home Affairs Department to delay it to Wednesday was rejected. A total of 164 people have been killed in protests in Kazakhstan over the past week, the country's health ministry said. Demonstrations first began over a rise in fuel prices, but grew to express broader frustrations about the government prompting a Russia-led military alliance to send soldiers to the country. Those who died include 103 people in Almaty, Kazakhstan's largest city, where demonstrators stormed government buildings and set some on fire, health officials said. The president's office said authorities have now regained control of the buildings and the situation in the country has stabilised. Russian TV station Mir-24 said occasional gunfire was heard in the city today, but it was unclear whether it was warning shots by police. Hundreds of people who were trapped in vehicles in a deadly blizzard have been moved to safety as rescuers scrambled to clear roads in northern Pakistan. Police said as many as 500 families have been stranded as would-be tourists rushed to view the winter snowfall in the hilltop town of Muri. At least 22 people have died, including a family of 8 and another family of 5, officials said. The blizzard on Friday felled trees and blocked roads in and out of Muri. All of those who survived after becoming trapped in their vehicles are now said to be safe, with some placed in shelters set up in the resort town, which sits at 2,300 metres above sea level. The Chinese port city of Tianjin is aiming to test its 14 million residents within the next 48 hours after a discovery of a cluster of COVID cases. Residents have been advised to stay home until tested and must return a negative result to get the health pass needed to use public transport. Of the 20 cases discovered, 2 are of the highly transmissible Omicron variant. China is pursuing a zero-COVID policy which aims to eradicate the disease in the community, in contrast to other parts of the world which have opened up following vaccination campaigns. China has responded to small numbers of local cases with mass testing and tight lockdowns. And finally today, new photographs have been released of the Duchess of Cambridge celebrating her 40th birthday today. The portraits, which were taken in Kew Gardens in West London last November by Paolo Roversi, will be eventually becoming part of the permanent collection at the National Portrait Gallery once it reopens. They show Kate in a relaxed poses, wearing different Alexander McQueen dresses. In one wearing a red dress, she completed the outfit with a pair of the Queen's earrings, which Her Majesty had loaned to her. In another, she is seen wearing a pair of earrings belonging to Diana, Princess of Wales, her late mother-in-law. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
You're watching the mother of all talk shows. We've got Gadi Francis, who is in fact in Lebanon, to talk about Gaza, about Israel, Palestine, and the region, because, of course, there are always real possibilities, sometimes probabilities, of real upsurges in violence there, which threatens the peace not just of the region, but potentially of the world. Now, here's some breaking news. We're just hearing that 19 people have died in a fire in the Bronx in New York City. It's the worst fire disaster in more than 30 years, and 9 of those 19 were children. If I'm not wrong, there was an almost as bad a fire in Philadelphia earlier in the week, where a significant number of people lost their lives, including, again, a significant number of children. We'll ask Rachel Blevins about that when she comes on the show. Now, on the poll, Claude says, I'm in Australia and I'll come to England to be with George to stop that war criminal Tony Blair get knighted. That's the spirit, Claude. And Jonathan says, I declare you King George of England. I do not recognise Elizabeth as the monarchy anymore. Thank you, Jonathan, I think. Snow Tanine Wolf says, I think they both need to rescind each on their end. Well, of course, that's the best possible outcome. But I'm a practical man. I'm looking for ways that we can broker a way out of the situation that we have. But if we don't, we'll have thousands in Windsor in June. Quite a day out, actually. And Billy says, Blair gets a knighthood while soldiers rest their lives for nothing. Gerard White says, in the early 1990s, I attended a David Bowie art exhibition in which Tony Blair was depicted as the devil. Prescient indeed. Brendan O'Connor says Blair's knighthood is a bigger insult than the BBC, including Oliver Cromwell, in its Greatest Britain in History poll. Both mass-murdering, bloodthirsty war criminals. And Idris says white, Western and European privilege precludes any appearance at the ICC. Only black Africans qualify for that appearance. And Yugoslavians. Paul Davies says, is it a coincidence that a decision was made today to create a no-fly zone over Windsor Castle? I think it's a significant announcement. We'll see. On the TV show, Breaking Bad was the greatest program ever made. This is in reference to me saying that The Sopranos was the greatest television ever made. Actually, I corrected myself. I think The Americans was just marginally better, but The Sopranos is up there in the top 2, 3 greatest television shows ever made. But Colin thinks Breaking Bad. I gave up Breaking Bad because I could see no redeeming feature in any of the characters. I had no affection for any of the characters. Anthony Penza says The Wire is the best TV show, definitely in the top 3. And Rake says, I'm sick of gangsters as entertainment. Yes, I can see your point in that. Now, we have Gadi Francis in Lebanon on the line now. I hope. Gadi, welcome.
Hello.
How nice to hear you and see you. We had a bit of problem with the picture earlier, but now you're looking resplendent as always.
Thank you.
First of all, let's start with where you are, and then we'll go down the coast a bit, as well as up the coast a bit. What's happening in Lebanon? The last we heard, ministers were being forced out of your government because of criticisms they had made of the Saudi massacre of the innocents in Yemen. And the economy was in free fall, and the streets were full of people trying to force the government out. What happened next?
Well, actually, it's a political deadlock alongside with maybe one of the worst economic meltdowns in the recent history. It's the biggest Ponzi scheme ever. You have a bankrupt situation for a sectarian regime that was built on a deal, on a very fragile deal after the civil war. And you know, things kept on escalating. What's happening in Lebanon now is that the political elite that was always chosen based on religion, based on this tribal kind of politics, is now trying to keep their heads, whether it's from asking them about the corruption, whether it's from imprisonment, or just to take like a ticket for the presence in the future of Lebanon. We are not well, but actually the political deadlock, as usual in a country as small and polarized and divided as Lebanon, it was always coming from the outside for us. So unfortunately, this reality that we're living in is probably, there's no end in sight for it until we see an end or something blooms for the rest of the region, for Syria, for Palestine, for Iraq. It's a very small country, sir, and you've known it, you've lived in it, you've witnessed our history more than myself, I suppose. There's no change in sight. It's just like the deep state kind of sectarian tribal power fighting to be there in the future. We're thinking about the whole political system might change. We're thinking a war might happen. We're thinking, no, maybe just an election, and then we go further like we did in the 2005, because you know and you recall something similar is happening in Lebanon, but with different nomenclature and details. I think we're really waiting for other countries to fix their stuff, and then who's going to lead us next? You know, the proxy warfare that is in the region has taken its toll on us. And just in your introduction, the way you introduced, actually Saudi Arabia was looking for an excuse to do that in terms of Lebanon, because they failed once again. Like after years of trying, they failed to remain in the Lebanese politics. Their main man is outside the country. And they don't want anything to do with Lebanon. So they waited to dig up just something he said on TV, which is basically 80% of the whole globe is saying. He just said this war is pointless. You know, he didn't even talk anti-Saudi. And then they did this whole campaign against Lebanon, against the Lebanese government, because they took this like as a chance, and they continue to do the same. So until Saudi Arabia gains its sanity back, until Syria blooms in the political future, the political compromise that will happen, until we know what's going to happen in Palestine, we're always going to be the most volatile country in the most volatile region in the world.
Well, as you said, I know your country very well. I did live in it a long time ago. And my heart bleeds. I bleed with you, in fact, as you are cut from one side and the other. The indivisibility of Lebanon with the fate of Syria is obvious. So let's go there next. The sanctions against Syria are, of course, in practice, sanctions against Syria and Lebanon. The presence of Takfiri fanatics in their tens of thousands in Syria obviously had its echo in Lebanon. But the Syrians and their allies have prevailed, although not yet finally conquered. The ISIS-Al-Qaeda challenge for state power, thank God, in Syria has failed. And now some of the satrapies in the Gulf that paid for the whole ISIS-Al-Qaeda war in Syria are now re-establishing relations with Syria. Is this a sign of hope, do you think?
Well, we don't know at what cost, sir. You know what we learned in the few years in the 10-year war that is in Syria, that there's always something hidden or something being cooked, whether it's with the Turks in the northeastern part of Syria, whether it's about the Golan Heights, whether it's about the internal politics, if the presidency or the Syrian state would give some compromises internally for the Islamists. There's always all this that's being talked about, that's being discussed. I think Syria, in the terms of everybody wanted Syria out, they were like the outcasts in the whole global community, and then they're coming back. You see the GCC countries coming back. This, of course, is a mark of a new era for Syria, and it prevailed with the help of Russia, basically, and Iran. So I think it's now we really need to look at Syria from the macro point of view. We really need to look at it linked to Turkey, and then you go northern to Russia and to what's happening to the whole reshuffling of the powers. I don't know if the American administration, the Biden administration, would be really different from the Obama one, since it has its same musketeers, so we don't know what's going to happen in the future of Syria. They say yes, they come back, but in the same time you have the Caesar actions, and you have Israeli airstrikes in a almost weekly pace. So I think everything is pretty mixed up in Syria, and it will have to do with the coming months and how Syria is going to come back with its relationships to other Arab countries, and whether that would really mean that it's the beginning of a new age for Syria.
Now, if Syria and Lebanon are indivisible, so is Lebanon and Palestine, because you have, apart from anything else, you have at least 1 million, maybe more, Palestinian refugees living in your country all this time, mainly from 48, but also some more in 1970 after Black September. And of course, there are millions of Lebanese people who care very deeply about the situation in Palestine. You're an expert on this. You've been to Gaza, you've written about it, made films about it, we've talked about it. How do you see the situation now in Palestine?
Well, sir, I must thank you for restating the truth that everyone wants to deny. We are indivisible. I mean, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Palestine. Everything is happening, and Jordan in the middle of all that. If we look at it in the same, follow of events or flow of events, it all started in Palestine. It all started in occupying Palestine. We don't have a problem with the world. We are not terrorists. We just have a living with daily danger that would come and design all this different titles to do the colonization, to do the apartheid state, to do the ethnic cleansing. That's where our problem is. It is in Palestine. This is why they are doing all they're doing about Syria or Lebanon. It's because we're just right next door to the world's favorite expansionist and racist. And I think what's happening in Palestine is the only bright thing that I can look at as a Lebanese sitting here in this nonsense that's happening in my country directly, in this economic collapse and political deadlock and all that. When I look on Palestine, when I look to Palestine and I look at the Generation Z, when I see the prisoner escape that happened, when I look at Hisham Abu Hawash yesterday, like reforming the rules of engagement to the whole Palestinian people and the whole Palestinian resistance, we must see these changes that are happening inside Palestine, and maybe this is the only hopeful thing I can look at. I mean, yesterday, like the past week, a Palestinian teenager was beaten up in Jenin, but the next day and the third day, he was beaten up by the Palestinian Authority, which is like they do the Israeli dirty work inside. But after that, we saw that spark of teenagers all over the West Bank, from Beit Lahem, from Ramallah, from Nablus, from every city in there. These kids, these are grown men, but these teenagers, they are saying, no, we're here and we have a different say, whether it's about the Sheikh Jarrah, like we witnessed a few months ago, or with what's happening in this week. This is a new generation, sir, in Palestine that is already making a different link. I mean, now you have a small skeleton forming that is linked to it, the Generation Z and their social media and their protests, and the evictions and the Israelization of Jerusalem and Muhammad al-Kurd and the whole movement, and the resistance, the armed resistance that would come out and say, you will not do this to the prisoners, because if you kill him, if he's dead, if Hisham Abu Hawash is dead, I will consider this an assassination and there will be retaliation. And then the next day, Israel forced to and obligated to free Hisham Abu Hawash, the longest hunger strike. These are things that weren't happening before. This link between the prisoners, the thousands of prisoners, and let me state and restate here that there are 1,595 people arrested for no reason, without charge, without access to evidence against them, under the system that they call it the administrative detention. So this man was arrested for no reason, for no charge, and then he did the longest hunger strike. And when they didn't want to let him out, you see Ziad Nakhali, you see a leader from the armed resistance, from Islamic Jihad, pointing out that if he dies, we will consider it assassination. And then the next day, the Israelis were forced to free Hisham Abu Hawash. This incident, Hisham Abu Hawash incident, is redefining the rules of engagement. And all these things that are happening, Gaza, the armed resistance, the Generation Z, the youth, and this prisoner revolution that is happening, I think it's like different than what we used to understand about Palestine. There's a new alliance between the forces of revolution from all these generations. And I hope that with this new year, like I previously read in an article while preparing myself to talk to you, sir, it's some analysts from inside Palestine call it's the year of the prisoners, because they're going to do a lot if it started like that.
Well, that's a very positive note to finish on. I'm deeply grateful to you. I hope we can talk more regularly. Maybe a report from you from the Middle East. You're part of the Middle East, at least. It's a pleasure always to have you on the show. Ghadi Francis,
thank you for the opportunity.
For joining us. In this week in 2010, an earthquake devastated Haiti. How many people died? A, 500, B, 100,000, C, 200,000. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
From the makers of Track and Trace comes the Boris Johnson sat-nav.
Right, next right. No, left. I mean left.
What?
Yes, this left. Oh, crikey, you've missed it, bugger.
Oh, bloody Tories.
Or have you? Turn round. Or, in fact, don't turn around. Carry on. Yes. You have arrived at your destination.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
The answer is a staggering 200,000 people lost their lives in the earthquake in Haiti in this week in 2010. I told you earlier about the extraordinary fire in the Bronx in the United States, in New York. 19 people have been killed, including 9 children, in an apartment block in the Bronx. 32 others have suffered life-threatening injuries after the building was engulfed in flames. News reports have broadcast horrific scenes of people screaming from windows, some even climbing out of windows to escape. It's being called the worst fire in New York City in 30 years. Fire was reported just after 11 a.m. local time, so in broad daylight, on the 3rd floor of a 17-story building at East 181st Street in Fordham Heights. The fire at the Twin Parks Northwest complex traveled very quickly and spread fast. The Fire Department of New York, great heroes, of course, on 9/11, said in the last few minutes that at least 54 people have been injured. 19 are being treated at the scene, and 35 others have been taken to nearby hospitals. Let's go to the lines. Lee in Harrow on Tony Blair. Go ahead, Lee.
Hi, George. How are you?
Very nice to hear from you. What would you like to say?
George, do you know what? I just, this Tony Blair thing, I can't get my head around it. I know that people are saying it's great that we've got 1 million signatures, but if you look at the population of this country, I feel that the majority, I don't know if they had a memory lapse or something, because why have we only got 1 million? They have to go and see, I mean, the killing of Tony Blair and, you know, the Kelly film that you did, which was phenomenal. I mean, you watch that and you just think, blood on his hands. Like, why have we only got 1 million? What's going on here?
Well, Lee, it's only been a week. To sign a petition online, you have to, first of all, be online, and a lot of people are not. You have to go to change.org, which is not the most reputable outfit in the world, given its ownership and some of the people that have been involved behind it and with it. There are a class of people that don't want to sign petitions and give their details to change.org. And yet, despite these two things, the shortage of time and the platform, well over 1 million people have signed it. So I am mightily happy. I've got to tell you, when I announced last Sunday that we were going to get 1 million, there were collective groans from my friends behind the glass who thought that I had overreached myself, that I had indulged in hyperbole. Hyperbole, moi. And lo and behold, I come before you a week later, and we're well over 1 million. So that'll continue to grow. But the main question is what we do next.
Well, let me ask you something, George, just before you come to that, because I do want to come to that, about what you said about meeting outside Buckingham Palace. There was something, and I'm hoping I'm okay to say this, but there was something I read today where somebody has alluded that the reason why he's been given this knighthood, this privilege, is because then he can influence his contacts in America, given what's happening with Prince Andrew's case. Do you think there'd be any merit in that?
I don't. I don't think the royal family need anybody else to make influence in the United States. I think that raison d'etat would mean that there's absolutely no way that Prince Andrew would be extradited or subject to an extradition request. I do think it's unlikely that Prince Andrew will ever again set foot in the United States, because then he would risk arrest. But I don't believe that the US will seek to extradite him. And of course, it goes without saying that no British court would extradite him. He's not Julian Assange, after all.
Of course, I was thinking that, yeah.
I don't think so. But the key thing is what happens next. Now,
do we have a date of when he's going to go
we got one from a caller earlier. Obviously, we'll have to confirm that. But the lady who called said that it's not at Buckingham Palace, it's at Windsor Castle, and it's in June, when the weather will be fine and when we can entrain and bus and car, cycle, we can descend on Windsor in huge numbers and have a whale of a time. We can turn it into a festival of resistance, and we can blockade the castle to stop the war criminal going in to receive his award. If that turns out to be right, I'm very glad. Gives us more time to build it, and Windsor's a better place to demonstrate than Buckingham Palace. Last word to you,
George,
Lee.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, knowing the history, I remember when he came to do a book signing a few years ago, somewhere in central London, he couldn't even do it because people were there pelting eggs, and security had to rush him in and rush him out the back door, and then the citizen's arrest abroad, and he can't go anywhere. So do you think that we would actually know publicly where it's going to be, or they might not change it at the last minute something?
They might, but all we can do is make it as difficult for them as possible to carry out this atrocity against the British people, which is what this would be.
Yeah. Let's build a campaign, George. I'm right with you there.
I don't know who'll be with me, but I'm sure that you will be. I'm sure that you will be. And I hope the rest of the audience too. Lee in Harrow, thank you kindly for your call. Let's go to Richard in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Good evening, sir. I think that you should be knighted instead of that despicable character, George, because you
I'm
tell
the People's
the truth
Knight.
all the way along.
I'm the People's Knight. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah. I was surprised to hear in the press, because this has ignited a lot of things, that Jeff Hoon, who was in Blair's cabinet at the time of the war when they were saying to go to war.
He was the Defence Secretary, yeah.
And he told Blair that he couldn't go to war because of the international laws. And Blair sent Powell and a few other people in to see him individually and said, you cannot declare this, and you certainly must give up any paperwork that you've got or burn it. And he said, no, I'm not. So then they sent him in again, and he had to give them it. And it was said that it went into a safe somewhere. And, of course, it got lost eventually.
Well, I'm sure he's still got a copy of it. What I would say is this, Richard. Jeff Hoon, or Buff Hoon, as I called him during the war, has a book to sell, and therefore one should treat his claims with skepticism. But the central claim that he made, that the Attorney General had circulated to a very small number of people a minute which said that the war would be illegal, undoubtedly happened. It's not even denied that that happened. It is true that the permanent secretary at the Ministry of Defence was asked by Jonathan Powell to burn that minute, although Jonathan Powell says he didn't ask him to burn it, he merely asked him to destroy it, which is a plea in mitigation that doesn't go very far. Jeff Hoon said that he put it in the safe instead, in which case, unless he's really a Buff Hoon, he'll have a copy of it, but he hasn't yet produced it. More importantly, I tried to interview Buff Hoon for my Killing Kelly film, which you kindly came to the Manchester showing of. I wanted to interview him because he said at the time that Blair sacked him from the misleading position of leader of the House, which actually means you determine the price of sausages in the canteen. That's all it means. When he was sacked from that position, he told Andrew Ronsley, the Observer journalist, that I could bring down the Blair government by 5 p.m. today if I were to deliver a speech about the facts behind the killing of David Kelly. He was too cowardly to give me that interview. I'm still open at any time to interview him, but it must have been one hell of a piece of information, Richard, if it could have brought down the British government by 5 p.m. in the afternoon. What do you think?
That would be a good thing to subpoena him and get him to tell the truth at this particular time. And instead of the Queen being cast aspersions upon about doing this for Blair, it would relieve her of it, and he wouldn't get his knighthood anyway.
Well, there's 100 reasons not to give him that knighthood. Richard, thanks. Mark is in Lancashire. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Mark.
Hello, George.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
If Maxwell talks about the knowledge that she has, and I can't believe she's still alive, and that's why she's not going to talk about the knowledge that she has.
Mm-hmm.
The whole government, and I'm talking world government, will fall down because they're all over it. And
well, I think if she was going to talk, she would have talked already, but she might still have it in her locker in order to get a retrial, to get an acquittal, or to get a very light sentence. She might, but I agree with you. If she looks likely to do so, they'll murder her, like I believe they murdered Epstein.
And McAfee.
I don't know about McAfee. I've not yet read Mark's wonderful book, which I've got. He kindly sent me here.
No, McAfee.
I've not had time.
Had all
you think he was also whacked, yeah?
Oh, yeah, he was definitely whacked.
Well, I'll take your word for it, but when I've read Eglinton's book, I'll interview the author, and we'll explore that very point. Okay, Mark, thank you very much indeed for that. Ladu Nis says, funded by NATO and the elite, that's what's happening in Kazakhstan. Jonky says, of course, this is the US doing. It's another attempt to divide Kazakhstan between Turkey, NATO, and against Iran and Russia. Victor Logan says, Kazakhstan is a leadership state that had Tony Blair to advise on how to maintain repression. Fancy that, like a bad penny. Tony Blair keeps turning up. Blair, as the world's most successful war criminal, is probably the best expert for them. And Big G Hayward says, yeah, Kazakhstan has a corrupt and sometimes vile government. The good people should not cheer for it to be offended by Western terror operatives. Reform needs to take place in order to stop this. And Big G Haywood says, read the grand chessboard, and you will understand the strategy of the imperialists in Eurasia. Kazakhstan is very important to them. Now, next question is, in 1943, this week, Adolf Hitler made a major declaration. What did he pledge? A, total war. B, world domination. C, the final solution. Answers after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Peter says the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really. And Yoda says, love the show. Best entertainment and education on the airwaves.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
In this week, in 1943, the Beast of Berlin, Adolf Hitler, made a major declaration of total war. War, what is it good for? Well, it's been good for Tony Blair. He's made a £100 million personal fortune directly and indirectly out of the war. And now, if present intentions are maintained, he will join the most elite echelon of the British aristocracy as not just a knight in very bloody armour, but as a member of the Order of the Garter. But that's if present intentions are maintained. In the poll that I'm running, thousands of you have voted, overwhelmingly, 84%, 88%, 96%, that Blair should decline the knighthood to save the Queen's blushes. But of course, we'd only be having this conversation if there had not been an uprising across the land of the news, over the news that was delivered under the cover of New Year's Eve, and crucially, if leadership had not been shown in tabling a petition behind which everyone could get behind. And that's down to my next guest. So eminent, I called for him to be made a knight. That's how highly I think of my next guest. He is, for me at least, the people's knight, Sir Angus Scott, and he joins us now. Angus, you're a voice artist and a presenter. You're not a politician of any kind. If you have any politics, they're the opposite of mine, you told me. So how come you and I end up in double harness on this?
I think it's very telling that we are indeed in this position. 2003, I was a young man. I served in the Territorial Army. I was, in many ways, the polar opposite to yourself, George. And 2003, Tony Blair took us to war. I was apoplectic. It just, well, for all the reasons that you have very eloquently, and much more eloquently than I can ever dream of displaying, explained why that was deeply, deeply wrong. And I think that's indicative, and the petition itself has proven to the world that this wasn't about politics. It was about what was morally right and what was morally wrong. And it was so morally wrong that it has united every shade of the political spectrum in saying in one big voice, this was deeply wrong on every possible level. And it's not just political. I've had fabulous messages from very refined ladies in the shires, people who have no interest in politics whatsoever. And they have thanked me personally. Thank you for giving me a voice, because this was so deeply wrong. I just had to join in this clamour to tell the world, to send a message to the world how utterly wrong this whole thing is.
Well, as you describe it, it's an uncanny echo of the Great March on February 15, 2003, which also was attended by every shade of political opinion, including many refined old ladies holding banners, make tea, not war, and so on. It was one of the most extraordinary cultural events of my lifetime. It was the coming together of the best of the British people. And of course, everyone on the march was representing several others, their own families, not least, that they had left behind at home in all the parts of the kingdom. It's odd, isn't it, that Tony Blair has now twice been the lightning rod that has united the country against him.
Absolutely. And I think the big thing that has struck me is just the depth of passion across the board. I cannot think of any other human being since 1945 who has evoked such deep, universal emotion across our nation. And the reason is very clear. It's because of, for me, it's two words. One word is lies, obviously, but the biggest word of all is betrayal. One of the worst sins any human being could do against another human being is betrayal in any context. He has managed to betray just about every section of our society. He betrayed the left, he betrayed our armed forces, and the list goes on. And as a result of that, that's why I think this depth of feeling has just manifested itself so powerfully. And more importantly, under any other issue, after 14 years, it would be long forgotten. It might be bubbling away quietly, but it's forgotten. The fact that we are a decade and a half down the line, and suddenly over 1 million people within a few days have just come out and said, you know, with a level of anger, it just proves just how significant this is. And likewise, actually how significant this message is, because it doesn't come from any one section of society, it comes from our good society as a whole.
Why do you think it took 14 years? My thesis that I adumbrated earlier in the show is that Prince Philip would have been dead against it. He had a particular dislike of New Labour, of Tony Blair, over the Diana funeral issue and all kinds of other things. I think that Prince Philip would have put the kibosh on this. Now that he's no longer with us, somebody somewhere in the palace has prevailed on the Queen to take an action which is really quite self-harming for her and for the monarchy.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting point, and it does actually raise a lot of discussions around this whole area. Why have they waited 14 years? I think that in itself is a tacit admission from the palace and the establishment that it's wrong. If it wasn't, they would have done it 14 years ago. So clearly, they have held back thinking, we are now in some form of quandary, because actually, from what I understand, it's not, obviously it's not a gift of the government, it is the gift of the palace, but it's actually not, it's not the Queen hasn't sat down and said, right, I want to give Tony Blair an award. Apparently it's convention, it's convention, it's almost an automatic honour to prime ministers.
Well, it would have been a convention 14 years ago, Angus.
Exactly, and that's my point. If it was a convention, and if he frankly deserved it, he should have got it 14 years ago. The fact that they haven't, I think, implies that they know in the palace that it's deeply wrong, and they tried to, I think they've strung it down the line as long as they dare. And with all due respect to the Queen, and I am a very staunch monarchist, I think, unfortunately, as you say, with the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh, that he was a very steadying force, and the Queen has never, in 70 years, ever put one foot wrong. Unfortunately, biology is biology. She is a 94-year-old lady. I sense that the weight of decision-making has moved more to her advisors than the Queen itself, and I'm being very presumptuous here, apologies if it offends the palace and all that, but biology is biology, and she would not have made this decision 10 years ago. But the problem now is that they have now entered a position where they've got themselves in a corner. How on earth do they get out of it?
Well, if they didn't know, in the words of the late and great Scottish comedian and actor Duncan McRae, when the man says, I didn't ken, he answers, well, you ken noo. They know now, if they didn't know before, that this act is a very damaging one that has divided the country instead of uniting it, turned people against the people who decided it, has further tarnished the name of the royal family and the institution of the monarchy. How could it be otherwise? So they know now. How do they get out of it, Angus?
Agreed. And I think, again, I know your views on the monarchy. And I, as a royalist, even my loyalty has been deeply shaken by actually all the events over the last couple of years with various members of the royal family. Princess Anne, I actually would thoroughly support your campaign to make
let's get a petition up. Make Anne the next monarch.
I'm a lady who really has not put a foot wrong.
I've met her. I've met her daughter. She's an outstanding figure. She works hard. She doesn't spend anything like what the others do. She's an acme of public duty. But of course, she's not next in line.
Yeah, of course, and of course we are bound by the Constitution, etc., etc. But so I think, to move the discussion on, I think we now, and I think you have talked about this earlier, we now need to look at, okay, let's be pragmatic about this, on the assumption that the palace cannot rescind this. Where do we go next? And the obvious next step is, okay, let's look at the recipient and Mr. Blair himself. Now, Mr. Blair's supporters are very vociferous and very loud in their support of Mr. Blair. They say he's a very honourable, a very decent, very principled man. Okay, well, I say to Mr. Blair, if you are that honourable, and as you said earlier, let's spare the Queen's blushes. Do the honourable thing. Why do you need another award, especially, frankly, one that's a bauble? Because if it's conventional, so what? It doesn't mean that much. You turn it down.
Well, I don't know if he likes a garter around his thigh. If he does, maybe that's the attraction. But as Peter Hitchens pointed out in the paper today, is he really in need of a bauble? He can buy one on the internet. It seems a big price to pay, and we've got to make it a bigger price for him to pay to accept this award.
Absolutely. And again, I think we have to make the assumption that Mr. Blair will prove his critics right and that he won't turn this down. So we then need to look at what do we do next then as this huge, powerful, united voice across the nation. And it's very clear to me, and I've been contacted by a lot of different sides of our society who have been brilliantly supportive of this campaign. And I'll just take this moment in time to thank you, George, for your own massive support, which has done so much for the campaign. Everybody has said to me independently, look, we need our voices to be heard, not just online, but I think we need our voices to be heard out there in the streets. We have, I do understand actually, as per one of your earlier callers, I understand it is Windsor and it is June. And that does give us 6 months to start putting the logistics together. Let's draw together all these fabulous sections of our society, all united in this one message. Let's draw upon that. Let's mobilize all these sections of society. Let's get them down like we did in 2003. And let's get them to march, whether it's in London, whether it's in Windsor, we can work that out. But I think we need to get this message loud and clear. We need to beat that drum as loudly until their ears ring.
Well, we'll march behind you. You're the best person to lead it. And we'll continue to publicize the petition and the action that needs to be taken. There it is now on the screen. Please, don't just sign it yourself. Make sure your wife, your husband, your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, your neighbor, your workmates, get them to sign it. Let's add to this enormous, gigantic, swell upsurge of opposition that Angus has made possible by tabling this petition. So let's stay in close touch, Angus. We will do everything that we can to mobilize, but I'm glad to hear you say the online is great, but it's not enough. It's a mile wide, but it's an inch deep. We need to have people on the streets of Windsor in June. It helps. It'll be a glorious day, I can now predict. And we should make sure that we have a gigantic number of people so that if the war criminal is going to embarrass the Queen by continuing to insist that he's taking this honour, that he'll have to walk through us or be driven at speed through us first. And the whole world will see, and the royal family will see, that it was not in our name, to borrow a phrase from 15, 16 years ago. Angus, I'm so impressed by you. I'm going to install you with some very fine people in the Mother of All Talk Shows Hall of
great.
Fame.
Thank you very much.
You are now a member of the Hall of Fame of the Mother of All Talk Shows. If I could give you a knighthood, I would. But I feel sure that the people will agree with me that you are the people's knight. Sir Angus Scott, arise and lead us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Should Tony Blair decline the knighthood to save the Queen's blushes? Yes, 87%. Yes, 84%. Yes, 96%. And thousands of you have voted. Keep voting. Keep signing the petition. Let's hear from Mike in South Carolina. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George, it's great to talk to you again, buddy.
And you, brother. Go ahead.
I have a couple questions and a comment about the Tony Blair situation.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that knighting is one of the only things the Queen can do, but does she also not appoint everyone to the House of Lords?
That's a very good point. She doesn't, but she titularly does, and it's a point I meant to make earlier to Angus. The reason Tony Blair will not go into the House of Lords, Mike, is that one and the same, the most banal and the most degrading. He will not go into the House of Lords because if he did, he would have to register his income and where it came from. And given that his income is obscene and that it came from some of the most obscene people on the planet, he cannot go into the House of Lords because then we'd know he'd have to declare exactly where he gets his filthy lucre from. Carry on, Mike.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. But I was pretty sure that was one of the things she did do. But
she does. It's in her name, but it's on the recommendation of the Prime Minister.
Okay. Well, one of the other things that I was going to talk about is that you know back in the day, and this is around the 9/11 date when I first started hearing from Tony Blair. I actually had a modicum of respect for him. I thought that, he might actually be, a good prime minister. And then he quickly dashed all that stuff. He's destroyed the left and all the things that he did regarding the Iraq War. I mean, if you go back and look at this, there's such a mountain of evidence if you start looking at the Chilcot Report and you look at the Downing Street memos and how he colluded with George Bush to fix the intelligence around going to war. I mean, all of this evidence is so overwhelming that there's no way that he could not be, considered a war criminal. And the other question is the UK in the ICC?
Yes, we are. Unlike the United States, we are. But the chances of Blair appearing there are, for the moment, remote.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, he doesn't make that decision. People in other countries actually make the decision. Whether or not he has to go there.
Yeah, you're right. A state would have to bring a case against him. A state.
And of course that happened. That happened with George Bush, even though George Bush took us out of the International Criminal Court before he invaded Iraq for that very reason. And but he has been taken, to The Hague on this, and there are people waiting for him to leave the country, him and the rest of the Bush crime family. I mean, these things must be addressed, and we need to keep really close notes on when this actual knighting is going to occur. And yes, a show of force is required.
Come over, Mike. We'd be delighted to see you in June in Windsor. Trust me, it's a very lovely place in June. Well, look, after the news, we'll be going live to Washington, D.C. to speak to Rachel Blevins. And we'll also be talking to Andrew Lowie on Lord Louis Mountbatten. In his previous appearance on that subject on the Moats was the most watched clip ever in the history of the mother of all talk shows. Both of them are coming up after the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
A senior British cabinet minister has called for the UK to show the rest of the world how to move from pandemic to endemic, as he suggested it would be helpful to cut the isolation period to 5 days to ease workforce shortages. The Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, played down suggestions that the government was imminently about to start charging for free rapid lateral flow COVID tests, which would lead to fewer infections in the community being caught. But he said the ultimate aim was to move to a position where COVID was endemic in the UK and the country had learned how to live with the virus. Zahawi also said the government's health experts and scientists were looking at whether it would be possible to move from asking people to isolate for just 5 days after a positive test, rather than the current 7 days, recently cut from 10. The boss of one of London's busiest hospitals has said he is worried about losing staff when new rules come in requiring them to be vaccinated. From April, frontline NHS staff in England will need to have the COVID jab or will be moved to another role. King's College Hospital Chief Clive Kay said his job was to encourage workers to get jabbed, and 10% of his 14,000 staff were still unvaccinated. The government's Nadhim Zahawi defended the policy as the right thing to do. From the start of April, under law, NHS staff in England who have direct face-to-face contact with patients will need to have been vaccinated against COVID. A similar policy has already been brought in for staff working in social care in England, with care homes warning it has worsened the staffing crisis. The NHS is already facing a severe lack of staff and is short of about 93,000 workers. The Labour Party has called for a windfall tax on North Sea gas and oil producers to help limit the expected rise in household gas and electricity bills by £200. The party says its £6.6 billion plan would also remove VAT on domestic energy costs for a year and increase the warm homes discount for poorer households. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said the UK was uniquely exposed to global energy price rises, but the government said it was working to manage the impact on consumers. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson has not ruled out taking steps to tackle the rising cost of energy amid pressure from some of his own backbench MPs. The trade body Energy UK predicts bills will surge by up to 50% in April when the change to the price cap, due to be determined in February, kicks in. This could leave an average household paying around £700 more per year, it says. The Australian government did not tell Novak Djokovic that his so-called medical exemption would allow him to enter the country to compete in the Australian Open, court documents claim. On Sunday, the government filed 13 pages of documents ahead of a hearing to decide whether the Serbian tennis star can remain in the country or be departed. It also challenged Djokovic's claims that he had a COVID infection at the end of last year. The Australian government has said in the documents that even if Djokovic is successful in the hearing tomorrow, it may block his entry to the country anyway. The hearing is due to start at 10 a.m. on Monday morning, 11 p.m. Sunday UK time, after a request by the Home Affairs Department to delay it to Wednesday was rejected. A total of 164 people have been killed in protests in Kazakhstan over the past week, the country's health ministry said. Demonstrations first began over a rise in fuel prices, but grew to express broader frustrations about the government prompting a Russia-led military alliance to send soldiers to the country. Those who died include 103 people in Almaty, Kazakhstan's largest city, where demonstrators stormed government buildings and set some on fire, health officials said. The president's office said authorities have now regained control of the buildings and the situation in the country has stabilised. Russian TV station Mir-24 said occasional gunfire was heard in the city today, but it was unclear whether it was warning shots by police. Hundreds of people who were trapped in vehicles in a deadly blizzard have been moved to safety as rescuers scrambled to clear roads in northern Pakistan. Police said as many as 500 families had been stranded as would-be tourists rushed to view the winter snowfall in the hilltop town of Muri. At least 22 people have died, including a family of 8 and another family of 5, officials said. The blizzard on Friday felled trees and blocked roads in and out of Muri. All of those who survived after becoming trapped in their vehicles are now said to be safe, with some placed in shelters set up in the resort town, which sits at 2,300 metres above sea level. The Chinese port city of Tianjin is aiming to test its 14 million residents within the next 48 hours after a discovery of a cluster of COVID cases. Residents have been advised to stay home until tested and must return a negative result to get the health pass needed to use public transport. Of the 20 cases discovered, 2 are of the highly transmissible Omicron variant. China is pursuing a zero-COVID policy which aims to eradicate the disease in the community, in contrast to other parts of the world which have opened up following vaccination campaigns. China has responded to small numbers of local cases with mass testing and tight lockdowns. And finally today, new photographs have been released of the Duchess of Cambridge celebrating her 40th birthday today. The portraits, which were taken in Kew Gardens in West London last November by Paolo Roversi, will be eventually becoming part of the permanent collection at the National Portrait Gallery once it reopens. They show Kate in relaxed poses, wearing different Alexander McQueen dresses. In one wearing a red dress, she completed the outfit with a pair of the Queen's earrings, which Her Majesty had loaned to her. In another, she is seen wearing a pair of earrings belonging to Diana, Princess of Wales, her late mother-in-law. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Rachel Blevins and Andrew Loney still to come, plus your calls, of course, and a second poll. Will Ghislaine Maxwell be granted a retrial? A yes, B no. You can vote on my Twitter feed, my YouTube channel, and my Telegram channel. Now, I brought you the awful breaking news about the fire in the Bronx, which 200 firefighters have been battling all day since 11 a.m. this morning, and a very large number of people, including children, have been killed. So the first question I need to ask our intrepid American colleague, Rachel Blevins, is, Rachel, thank you for being with us. What news can you bring us of this dreadful fire?
Well, it is an absolute tragedy, George. So far, we're hearing that at least 19 people have died and likely dozens have been injured. And this is one of those cases where you're talking about at least a 19-story apartment building. We don't know yet what caused the fire. We don't know yet exactly when it's going to be put out. But one of the most tragic parts about this is that this story doesn't stand alone. It was just earlier this week we heard another story about a massive apartment fire over in Philadelphia, and multiple people were killed as a result of that. And so we know that obviously firefighters are doing everything they can to contain the fire right now, but that is definitely something we will continue to follow and hope that, you know, they can recover as many people as possible.
I was sure that I remembered that there had been a terrible fire in Philadelphia just this week, so that is 2 within a week. This is bound to raise questions about the fireproof nature of these apartment blocks and the ability to stop fires spreading throughout them with such devastating effect.
Absolutely. It always comes back to infrastructure at the end of the day. You know, we talk about how the United States will pour billions and even trillions of dollars into other countries, but when it comes to our own infrastructure here, it always seems to be too little too late, and that is incredibly unfortunate that, you know, we're seeing another story like this, and the hope is that, you know, it doesn't continue. I'm sorry, my dog has decided he's going to join the conversation.
That's all right. He's always welcome. Let's go to some of the other exotic wildlife that a year ago exactly on January 6th protested and broke into the Capitol building. I don't buy this idea that it was an insurrection. I've seen insurrections. I'm watching insurrections right now in Kazakhstan, for example. That's an insurrection. That is a challenge for power. That's not what happened on January 6th, although the Democrats and the media that support them have continued to call it that for an ulterior motive, I suspect, of trying to use it as a means of stopping Donald Trump from running for the presidency next time. What's your take on the commemoration, the speech by Joe Biden? He didn't mention Trump by name, but it wasn't hard to work out it was him he was talking about. How does the land lie on January 6th?
You know, I would say that after watching the way that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and all of the members of Congress who gathered together for that visual on the steps of the Capitol, rather, on the anniversary of January 6th, after watching that, I think they all belong in Hollywood, because it was absolutely laughable to see all of these people, and you know why they're there, you know why they're acting like that, because they are the ones who think that they may have been in danger if there had been an actual insurrection. And I agree with you. I mean, especially when we look back at this footage, it is one of those cases where the media has tried to make it out to be something that it simply is not. I mean, the vice president of this country stood there and compared it to 9/11. That to me is insane, not just for the fact that 3,000 people died on that day, but also for the fact that millions of people around the world have paid the price for 9/11 every single day since it happened. And so this idea that something like this, and especially the way that the United States government has handled it, I mean, when we look at everything that transpired that day, there are a number of reports of people who believed that there were federal informants in the crowd going in. I mean, there was at least one man who has a little bit of an interesting story where he was seen on a number of different videos. He had a MAGA hat on. He was telling people we should go in and storm the Capitol. And then all of a sudden this summer, he magically got taken off of the FBI's most wanted list. He's never been charged with anything. Yet there's a number of people who were there who had their faces posted all over bus stops and all over cities saying that they were wanted by the U.S. government. And so it is insane to me to look at a day where, yes, you know, people did go into the U.S. Capitol. Yes, in a number of instances, they were let into the U.S. Capitol. And now they are made out to be the equivalent of the modern day 9/11. I mean, it is a story that belongs in Hollywood for how just ridiculous and truly dramatic it is.
Yeah, they are acting, but they're acting for a purpose. The purpose, at least, is to demonize the Republican Party and, in particular, Donald Trump, its last president. But most, it's to pave the way for a legal move to try and block Trump from running. Do you think there's any possibility of that? And if that were to happen, what would the consequences be?
You know, I think there's always I never want to rule out the possibility in the case that they are able to make something happen. Now, as far as what we've seen so far, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case when it comes to Trump running again in 2024. But I also think that they have to take a step back and look at, just as you said, what are the consequences of that? Because we have to remember that here in the United States, more than half of the people who voted for Trump in 2020 believe that there was some sort of voter fraud that played a role in the outcome of the election. So if that's the case, that means you have millions of Americans who already don't trust the system as a whole, already believe that it was rigged or tampered with in some way. And now you come in and you say that the guy that they would vote for can't run. I mean, that sounds like something that the U.S. would try to instigate and make happen in another country, let alone in its own country. Now, on the flip side of that, especially since we've watched Democrats sit there and try to make this all about Trump and try to remind the American people of, remember just how horrible it would be if Trump were able to come back into office. Well, then what that does is that distracts from the fact that Democrats really don't have a plan. I mean, you look at this party right now, you look at the fact that they've got Joe Biden And then they've got Kamala Harris, who literally wants to compare January 6th to 9/11. I mean, I do not know what other contenders they have to put up there or what else they have to run on, because we also have to remember that their whole thing was to say, give us the power in every single portion of government and we will give you what you want. We will finally follow through on those campaign promises. Well, not only have they not done that, but it seems like now all they can do is just point at Trump and say, well, anything can be better than him.
On that point, one guy, wasn't he? The one senator was stopping their great rebuilding plans. Is that still so? Is it still log jammed, or is it dead now?
So it's still, at least from how I understand it, it still hasn't gone through. They had kind of put off on taking a vote until they feel like they can get that support. And so at the moment, their huge Build Back Better plan is still kind of hanging in the balance. Now, as to when we'll get a vote, I don't know just yet, but it'll certainly be interesting to see, because it is one of those cases where, I mean, I think voters have to look at that and realize, well, wait a second, and especially, I mean, I know that we've talked about this before, just the way that they do all of this, where they take all of these different issues and they cram it into a $2 trillion bill instead of taking individual issues and actually making members of Congress vote on them. I mean, it is one of those cases where I do not understand why they do things the way that they do them and why they make it about forcing you to vote for something based solely on your political party and not actually based on how you feel about the issue.
Well, it's, of course, a big week internationally. There are US-Russia talks this week, accompanied by a steady drumbeat of war propaganda from Secretary Blinken, threatening Russia with sanctions as extreme as those on North Korea, and so on. Is there any cause for optimism that we can take some of the heat out of the international situation this week in these talks?
You know, is there a cause for optimism? That's a good question. Now, I will say that at the end of the day, there is always that hope that maybe there will be an adult in the room who will realize that if the US and Russia keep going down the path that they're going down, it's not going to end well for anyone. However, unfortunately, that adult really isn't in the Biden administration at the moment, because we continue to see people like Antony Blinken, who this week, I mean, I feel like we've heard more from him in the last week than we have in several months, where he was talking and claiming, you know, he made that statement saying that, oh, if you let Russians into your house, then they aren't likely to leave very soon, when I think we've all watched 2 decades of U.S. foreign policy where the U.S. has not only gone into people's houses, but also bombed their houses and invaded their countries and then continued to occupy them for 2 decades. So clearly he needs to read a little bit of a history book. However, when it comes to where the U.S. is standing, it also is incredibly troubling Blinken's responses to this security deal that Russia was trying to offer on both their end and from the US and NATO. It's crazy to me to think that he would sit there and say, oh no, we won't agree to that, or we won't even consider that, when at the end of the day, you would think that avoiding World War III would be what they all want. But maybe my pessimism about it will not quite come into effect this week, and maybe their talks will lead to something substantial.
Remember her name, Rachel Blevins. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington, D.C. Will Ghislaine Maxwell be granted a retrial? Yes, 48, no, 52 on Twitter. Yes, 67, no, 34 on YouTube. And on Telegram, yes, 56, no, 44. Quite close. Get voting on my Twitter feed, on my Telegram channel, and on my YouTube channel. I want to talk now about the podcast. You may think I'm a bit obsessed by it. Well, in a way I am, because I'm somebody, maybe you are too, who heard people talking all the time about podcasts but didn't quite know what they were. I thought for a time that they were a little capsule that you would have to buy and put into your computer or whatever. I now understand a bit more. But what I am certain of is that the Moats podcast, the mother of all talk shows podcast, is blazing a trail right across the world. And every time I learn more about it, the more proud I am. Not least of the man who came up with it and pioneered it and pilots it across the globe. Simon, thank you very much indeed for everything that you have done. What can you tell us about the last week on the Moats podcast?
Well, hello, George, and hello to all the Moats listeners and viewers all over the world, but especially to the podcast listeners. It's been another fantastic week, George. Let me just say that December was a real milestone month for the podcast. Yet in 9 days of January, we've reached a third of December's downloads already. Wow. Believe it or not, and I'm not lying when I say this, we've had a 54% increase on us listeners just from last week alone. This is probably due to the fact that we've now got subscribers in Mozambique, Jersey, and also in Kenya. On top of that, we've now begun charting in the nation of Qatar, like you mentioned in your monologue earlier, and it looks like it's going to be another milestone week for Moats. A big welcome as well to new subscribers finding us on Spotify, that's Apple Podcasts as well, Deezer, Google Podcasts, Guyana, and if none of those are to your fancy, you can check in the podcast index where you'll find where you can listen to us. And it really does help us subscribers. It helps us grow. One way that you can do that is by leaving us a 5-star review. You can see there, you can count them. Let me just read one for you here, George. What a wonderful podcast the Moats podcast is. George Galloway has a rich range of guests. He's engaging, an insightful anchor role, and he features his monologue, which is captivating. Sensible approach to his interviews, poses good questions, and then shuts up and listens, unlike so many anchors in the world. Consistently one of the best watches, listens every single week, and I couldn't agree more. Remember, you can now leave ratings for your favourite shows on Spotify too. It's just up in the little top left-hand corner where the photo of the podcast is. So be a friend, tell us about Moats, and remember, 5-star reviews.
God bless you, Simon. Thank you very much indeed for all that. And although we've now charted in Qatar, I can bring you the news that we've just charted in Oman also. So even in the Gulf, we are breaking records. And don't forget, we're #1 in Zimbabwe. Now, I'm coming to Liverpool in a couple of months' time, in March. Actually, there's the poster for it. The Hope Street Theatre in Liverpool, Monday the 28th of March at 7 p.m. And you can get your tickets from ticketquarter.co.uk. Now, remember, these are very, very small venues. The number of tickets is extremely restricted. So don't think, well, it's nearly 3 months away, I can wait. Or it is 3 months away, I can wait. Don't do that. Because if you do that, you might well be disappointed. So please get your tickets now so that we know that we've got a full house in the Hope Street Theatre. Now, here's a call from Detroit on Blair and Cheney. It's from Anthony. Go ahead, Anthony.
Hey, George.
Hi.
Yeah, you're dealing with your war criminal over there. And while they did the whole January 6th commemoration, I guess, they were heaping praises on Dick Cheney.
Yeah,
and,
he was rehabilitated. I read that the Democrats were queuing up to kiss his hand.
I mean, what's that all about? It's sickening. He's sickening, and it's their new thing. But they did a candlelight vigil. It lasted the whole day, and I said, "Where's their candlelight vigil for all the people he and Blair killed, Cheney and Blair?" So
unbelievable.
It's a sick thing.
Well, George Bush was rehabilitated first, and you can sort of understand that more, because he plays the, oh, shucks, I'm a teddy bear. But Dick Cheney is one of the most sinister individuals. I mean, it's like he walked straight off the set of Dr. Strangelove. And how do liberals get to lionizing Dick Cheney?
Hey, well, they came up with this mass formation psychosis in terms of this new pandemic concept, but maybe that was in play with the whole war on terror the whole time. They're all in their psychosis. That's all I can think of.
And who are they impressing, the Democrats, with this?
Mostly themselves, I don't know what they think they have to
I just don't know
maintain
what the
idea that
constituency for Dick Cheney is. Do you know what I mean? How does that gain you political strength? How do you get more votes in the midterms? By queuing up to kiss the hand of Dick Cheney? I don't get it, Anthony.
Oh, if they lose, they get to fundraise more. I don't think they're afraid of losing.
Really?
Yeah.
It's all about the money. Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah.
Let's go to Steve in Leeds on Tony Blair. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, George. Can you hear me?
Yes, brother. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering if I can pick your brain a bit about the meaningfulness of what these titles of knighthood actually... Is it actually an important title to hold?
No,
I mean,
no, it's a piece of archaic flumery, Steve.
Exactly.
The point is, though, yeah, I mean, I'll let you back in, but the point is, it represents a reward from the state by the monarch to a war criminal, a man who has disgraced the country, and indeed the armed forces of the country, of whom the chief is the Queen. It is utterly perverse.
However, if you look at people who have won these types of awards in the past, like Salman Rushdie, he offended over 1 billion people, and he wasn't rather meaningless.
Well, a knighthood is 10 a penny. I could actually name the price. If you donate X to one of the parties, you'll get a knighthood. No, knighthoods are 10 a penny. You're right. And that's what Rushdie got. But that's not what Blair's getting. Blair is being admitted into the Order of the Garter, which is the elite 24 people in the state. The 24 most respectable, respected people in the state. That's why this is an outrage. Because the knighthoods are given by Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer. But this is given only by the monarch, the head of state. And 14 years after he left office, it is a perversity, an obscenity, that he should get it now. Last word to you.
Well, I agree with you. I just worry about people getting their backs up about something that other people in the past have said is meaningless. And if you look at Barack Obama, he was nominated and won the Nobel Peace Prize before he did anything, even before he was in office. And Donald Trump, he was nominated, and Henry Kissinger, he actually won it.
Now, don't be defeatist, Steve. We have mobilized more than 1 million people in a few days.
Oh, and I'm one of them,
it's important. It's important that we take the fight to the enemy. Thank you very much indeed for that. Richard is in Wales. Go ahead, Richard.
Good evening, George. First-time caller.
Welcome.
Quite nervous.
Take your time. Take your time. Don't be nervous.
Cheers, George. All the very best. Of course, I signed and shared the petition. I was really interested in that. But I wonder if I could pose a question
of course you can.
About the subject. Do you know, or do you have an opinion of how much or what Her Majesty might have known about Tony Blair compared to what us enthusiasts that already might?
Well, I'm 100% certain that she knows everything about Tony Blair, and if she was deficient in any way, I'm sure that her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, had plenty to say to her over the years about Tony Blair, because there was extreme bad blood between the Blairites and the Duke of Edinburgh. And that, I think, is the reason why he's had to wait 14 years and for the demise of the Duke of Edinburgh. There is an issue, if that's what you're implying, about whether at 94 she is fully in charge of events. I think that mentally she's absolutely compos mentis, but she may have been lent on inside the palace, and if so, one would have to surmise that that was from her son and heir, Prince Charles.
Oh, wow. Thank you, George. Thank you for taking me on, and all the very best to all your projects.
Thank you. Thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate that very much. Now, last question, I think, of the evening. In 1913, the British House of Commons accepted Home Rule for Ireland. What got in the way of it happening? A, the Great War. B, Lord's rejection. C, Church objections. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Here? Where am I?
Welcome to St. Peter's Gate, my son.
Is this one of that Hillary's tricks, that devil?
Be still, my son. The Clintons cannot hurt you here. You are safe with me in heaven.
Oh, heck. Knew I shouldn't have taken Bob's homemade vaccine. Oh, Lord have mercy, I am not worthy.
Before you pass on, you may ask any question you desire.
Anything?
With my omniscient knowledge, I can tell you anything you wish to know.
Well, Lord, you gotta tell me. All-powerful creator of this universe, before you judge me, I've been searching for answers my whole life.
Yes, my child.
I have to know, who shot JFK?
Another one. It was a lone gunman by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. He was not a government agent, and there was no second shooter on that grassy knoll in Dallas.
My God! This goes higher up than we thought!
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Well, what stopped the Home Rule for Ireland in 1913 was, of course, the Great War of 1914. Now, Andrew Lowie is not just a brilliant author, he is an indefatigable searcher after facts and truth, and in particular, that truth that is oftentimes locked up in trusts and in universities and in various files in various institutions that ought to be available to the historian and thus the broad general public, but frequently isn't. And Andrew Lowie is one of those, and I think the most successful of those, who fights for our right to know, for freedom of information in the field of history. Now, he's been on the show several times because many of his interests are also great interests of mine. But the first time he was on the show was to talk about Lord Louis Mountbatten, the uncle, of course, of the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, and the cousin, or perhaps uncle also, I don't know, he'll tell us, of the Duke of Edinburgh that we were speaking of just a few moments ago. It turned out to be the most watched clip ever in the history of the mother of all talk shows, and that is saying something. Now, breaking, he's got new news about Mountbatten. We're better to break it than here on the mother of all talk shows. Andrew, thank you very much for coming back on the show. What new on the Mountbatten story? It's grisly enough, as we already know from you. Has it got any better in the last week or two, or is it turning even more ugly?
No, I mean, there's some good news, and thank you very much for asking me back. Prince Charles called Mountbatten his honorary grandfather. He's actually his great-nephew. The Duke of Edinburgh was Mountbatten's nephew. And the developments are that we've had our hearing last month to look at or the appeal that was brought by the Cabinet Office and Southampton University against the Information Commission's decision in 2019 that these Mountbatten diaries and letters, which were bought for the public with public monies in 2011, should be made available to me and other researchers. And this fight has been very much for the principle of making these files available for all researchers, not just because I'd written about the Mountbattens. Now, the good news is we've got 99% of the material. The interesting news is that it's all pretty innocuous stuff, and one wonders why the government made such a fuss about it. But we're still fighting over 100 redactions. Now, these are redactions made for various reasons. The Data Protection Act, the Freedom of Information Act, Communications of the Queen is the main one, Section 37. And it's very clear from looking at those redactions and the ones that I've been able to establish is that many of those names are already in the public domain, often in previous editions, for example, of books about the Mountbattens written with their authority. And the references to the Queen are pretty innocent. They're the remarks like "I had tea with Lilibet" and "Prince Philip came across for a ride or a shoot." So I'm afraid this is just part of the culture of secrecy in Whitehall. And this is a face-saving operation. They should have released these documents 10 years ago. They've been forced to do so by my campaign and the decision of the Information Commissioner. And they're just trying to mount a rearguard action. We'll know the decision of the tribunal in a few weeks' time. And I will be fighting not just to return my costs, which now come to close to a third of £1,000,000. And so one wonders how much public money has been spent fighting this. I estimate about £1 million. But also what's emerged is that at the same time, the correspondence between Edwina and Nehru, the Indian Prime Minister, with whom she had an affair, that correspondence was bought by us for the public and has not been released. And so the next battle will be to get those letters released, because I think those will be much less innocuous than the diaries and letters that have been released.
Well, so, call me distrustful, but I smell a rat when I hear that the government spent perhaps £1 million to stop files being opened, only for when those files are opened, for them to be entirely innocuous. That doesn't sit right with me. I mean, I'm not Sherlock Holmes, but it makes me suspicious. Does it make you suspicious?
Well, I mean, I fought this battle in the hope that there would be material to be released. We now have 99% of it. I spent the weekend going through it, 30,000 pages, and there is nothing there that's going to scare the horses or upset the Queen. So it's only these 100 redactions, and even on the 100 redactions, we've been able to establish, my lawyers and myself, that there's material that we can identify. Often it's just blank bits of paper, but the stuff that is often just a missing name, like a detective or valet, has often been named, often on the same page in the diary or letter, or in other parts of the diaries and letters. So I think the sad thing, I'd love to be able to say there's the enormous disclosures here that will change our view of Indian independence, for example. But the fact is that this has just been a face-saving operation, that they've been caught out. I do think that the Nehru correspondence will reveal all sorts of things. The fact that perhaps Mountbatten's wife had an affair with Nehru before independence, that he was not neutral in independence, and that the Pakistanis have a justifiable grievance against the Mountbattens. But it's all part of, I think, a bigger question about how we defer to the royal family, particularly the government and the Cabinet Office, and how our history has been censored. And, you know, this is the mark of a dictatorship like China or a banana republic. It's not the mark of a formed democracy. And I think that's the thing that needs to be changed. We can't curate our past. We as historians have to use these documents as the building blocks to tell the story of the past, and we have to be given access to them. I mean, my other concern is that there's favoritism, that there are tame historians who are fed stuff who will say the right things and not scare the horses. And there are others who are perhaps a bit more independent, who actually are out to get the truth about the story of our history. And they have been denied access. And I know a lot of historians feel very strongly about this issue, not just me.
Perhaps this battle was fought as it were, as a skirmish, albeit an expensive one, with the main battle to come over the Edwina Nehru correspondence. Is that a possible explanation?
I think that's absolutely right. I think there are two things here. One is that this was trying to be a line in the sand to keep one off the more important things, and a way of basically trying to break people like me who are determined to get to the story of the truth and to put us off ever trying to bother again. But I think there's also the ministerial direction which the government used as an excuse to give them control over these diaries. They then dropped that objection in the hearing. And I think there are some big questions about whether this ministerial direction, which no government department seems to know about, no one seems to know who signed it, they haven't produced any documentation about it, it wasn't produced in the House of Commons. I think that they have basically tried to enact some legislation without a proper authority, and they're going to be caught out. But yeah, I think this is an example to prevent others from trying to do what I'm doing.
If, Andrew, I know quite a bit about this area and about this period, though not nearly as much as you. But I'm well familiar with the feeling in Pakistan and amongst generations of Pakistani leaders that if Lord Mountbatten's wife was having an affair, a sexual affair, with the leader of the Indian Congress Party prior to independence and partition, with Mountbatten's knowledge and approval, which is what is widely believed, then that represents a big betrayal of Pakistani interests, of Indian Muslim interests at that time. What do you say?
I say that's absolutely right. And I do allude to this in my book, which came out 2 years ago. I think there's a lot of evidence that the affair was sexual and the affair began before August 1947. And that comes from testimony of people who saw them together, people who worked with them. And this is just, again, part of the cover-up. But certainly this correspondence will, I think, prove it. And that's what they're clearly worried about. I think one of the other ridiculous things in the hearing was that the head of the Pakistan India Department from the Foreign Office was brought out and said with a straight face that some of the disclosures in the diary, remember this is the private diaries of individuals and letters between a married couple, that whatever they said to each other would actually rock Anglo-Indian or Anglo-Pakistan relations. You know, which is a ridiculous thing 75 years after the event. The other scandal, of course, is that the archivist at Southampton who closed the archive then wrote to the Cabinet Office and came into a cozy relationship to edit the diaries himself. Neither Southampton nor the Cabinet Office have answered any Freedom of Information requests to explain how much money has been spent on this attempt to suppress the diaries and letters. But you know, my own feeling is they spent £5 million buying them and they spent £1 million trying to prevent us seeing them.
Wow. Well, more power to your elbow, Andrew, and I look forward to us talking again once you've got access, as I hope you will, to this potentially dynamite correspondence. Andrew Lowney, thank you very much indeed. You must read Andrew's books, by the way, not just on Mountbatten, though that was a masterpiece, but on Guy Burgess, the Soviet spy, as part of the Cambridge ring of spies. He's really terrific, absolutely terrific. Social media, Ian Muir says, should Tony Blair decline the knighthood? No, he should keep it. He should show the world what a useless, immoral, warmongering, duplicitous XXX he is. Mr. Galloway, please tell him. Thank you. He's told. Dave Evans says he should, but he won't. The guy has no morals. The only thing that Tony cares about is Tony, regardless of the cost to other people's dignity or indeed their life. And Rob says, sadly, I don't think he has the sense to do the right thing. He's probably already planning his next money-spinning speaking tour off the back of it. And David Fenton says they are both complicit in this. She's every bit as bad as him. She is proving to be the deaf adder that stoppeth her ear. They are from the same litter, hence the plaudits and honours. Duncan says causing constitutional monarchists to turn against the Queen will only hasten the day he is President Blair. He doesn't care. In fact, he probably is laughing his head off. And Given says Tony should accept it with his warmonger reputation. He meets the criteria. And Logic Dictates says he should pass it to Prince Andrew and solidify his rightful place in that mountain of moral fortitude that is the royal family. And Crimson Blade says, I couldn't care less. Blair being offered a knighthood only shows how much the establishment value these muppets and puppets. Both the monarchy and the capitalist system need to go. On you go. Why not? Overthrow it. And with it go their titles, lands, and their establishment stooges they call politicians. You need to join the Workers' Party of Britain, of which I'm the leader. But thanks for that little bit of education. And Political Darkside podcast says Blair shouldn't be allowed the opportunity to decline. The knighthood should be rescinded. I care not for the blushes of the Queen either. Now, Caroline is in Coatbridge. Let's hear from her. The holy ground.
Yes, good evening. You've mistook me for a Glaswegian. I was born in Parkhead. I moved here 20 years ago.
Parkhead to Coatbridge it's not that far.
Listen, I didn't know where I was coming to. It was a stroke of luck. I landed on Coatbridge when I tossed the coin.
It's lovely.
I could only afford this or Airdrie. I never knew where I was going. Anyway,
you definitely made the right choice.
I didn't know. Like, the people laugh and they say, why wouldn't someone you have known? Anyway, I want to ask you something, George.
Yeah.
What I want to know is this. Can you tell me if flying a Palestinian flag is illegal?
No, definitely not. No, absolutely not.
Because my little town centre, we fly the Irish flag alongside the Palestinian flag in Coatbridge. We fly it loudly and proudly. But I was at the game when you were arguing with Lord Sugar, and I held my Palestinian flag loudly and very proudly, right? And as you know, we got a £60,000 fine.
Yeah, although it was more than made up for by the fundraising that happened. It was a very great credit. It was a very great credit to the Celtic support. No, there's a difference though, Caroline. It's illegal to fly it under UEFA rules. It's not illegal under the law to fly it,
right.
And that's why you can fly it in the town centre in Coatbridge. God bless you all.
We also flew it in Glasgow city centre at the very same time of the attack in the Gaza Strip. You know the one about 8 years ago. But when you were arguing with Lord Sugar, you pointed out it's okay for the London clubs, I don't know which ones you were referring to fly the 1947 Rogue States flag. But it's no okay for me and mine to fly as the Palestinian flag at Parkhead and Celtic Park. So where's the difference from them flying the Rogue State of 1947's flag for me and mine in Scotland to fly the Palestinian flag? And to see the people in the Gaza Strip weeping and saying thank you to people like me for raising the money and letting the world know we stand beside them, and we always will. It's theirs. They were kicked out it with the Balfour Agreement. Someday, the whole of the people that I know, we stand beside them. In the Sinn Féin office in Coatbridge, we fly that flag alongside the Irish flag, and we will always fly it until the Rogue State is gone. Right, and that's all I wanted to ask, if it's illegal. I can't understand because...
No, it's definitely not. It's absolutely not illegal. Thanks, Caroline, for that powerful call. Hail, hail. The Celts are here. And Ian in Hounslow on Tony Blair. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George.
Hi.
I've been following the media hullabaloo over it.
Yes.
It's gone very quiet.
Well, I don't know. As soon as it got to 1 million, they lost interest. That's why we've got to get it up and up and up. If it keeps going up and up and up, it'll get back into the papers.
Now, Blair's fan base is Thatcherites, rabid Zionists, EU maniacs, and warmongers. And if you listen to the people saying he should have it, it's those four categories. Those four categories. Now, I've written a letter to the Queen. I've got a bit of Basildon Bond. I've used my best joined up and a first-class stamp. And I checked on Google how to correctly address Her Majesty, how to start a letter, finish it, and what to say.
And have you got a reply yet?
I only sent it a couple of days ago, but I wasn't rude. I was just said, I think this is a mistake, and I think it will undermine the monarchy, and really, it could end up with a republic if you don't think about it seriously.
Well, I'm available to negotiate a satisfactory conclusion to all of this if Her Majesty is watching. Ian, thanks for that excellent call. Scott is in Glasgow. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, hello, George. Hi. Earlier you said Blair lied to the Queen and to her armed forces. I don't think so. I mean, the Queen is very happy to go along with the invasion of Iraq. And in fact, you see, I think it was the what was it when she actually altered the law? I think it was a private member's bill where she actually said no. I make the decision of when we go to war in Iraq, not Parliament.
No, I don't remember that. We did. Parliament did make the decision.
Yeah, no, I think it was something to do with the Queen, the private members bill. Something she did actually alter that, and it's like people think that she's not an old lady on a
it's still it's not the law because the Prime Minister acts with the Prime Minister. We of course don't have a constitution. We keep talking about a constitution, but we don't have one. But the Prime Minister acts with the royal prerogative on matters of war and peace, but Blair broke that and was determined to make the Parliament shoulder the responsibility for the decision to invade and occupy Iraq. And Parliament duly did, although there was the biggest rebellion of Labour MPs, I think 130 Labour MPs, one of them me, rebelled against that decision. And then David Cameron gave Parliament the vote on whether or not we should join the war against Syria. And he lost the vote. I spoke in the debate, one of my proudest moments, when David Cameron was defeated, and therefore Britain could not go to war with Syria. So
I think George, the Queen vetoed actually that private members bill, and I think she did vetoed it. Yeah, I think she.
No, the Queen has no. The Queen has no veto. Look,
people miss. They believe that she hasn't got this power. They believe that she's a nice old lady on a biscuit tin and all that, and can't do that. No, but she stepped in and actually.
No, she didn't. We didn't join the war. David Cameron was defeated, and he accepted his defeat, and so they'll be less keen. That's the problem, Scott. They'll be less keen to allow Parliament to make such decisions in the future, and prime ministers will try, if God forbid a new war comes up, will try to take the decision themselves in the name of the monarch. Got to press on, Scott. Sergei is in St. Albans on Kazakhstan, so we better hear Sergei. Go ahead, Sergei.
Привет, добрый вечер, Mr. George Galloway. Nice to speak to you from the east of your Kazakhstan. The situation there is quite dire. It can escalate anytime. I have personally experienced this because I was former propaganda. I worked in propaganda in the Russian news company, and I know that basically there is going to be psychological warfare from both sides. I personally am giving a warning to the West, not to the Western militaries and the government, not to provoke, not to do what they did in 2001 in Afghanistan, in the invasion of Iraq and Kosovo. Basically, if the West and East go to war, there will be a jihad war against the West from the Middle Eastern nations. that the West has previously invaded villages cannot let this happen because our daughters and children depend on it.
Well, Pasiba and Da, you're right in what you said. I think I was just waiting for him to break into Elvis. I thought that was Kenny in Acton. It is the legend that is Norma up next, and probably lastly in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. Angus Scott, he was I thought he was great.
Wasn't he a wonderful guest? Yes.
Yeah. Now, over the million votes, great. And actually, I did say last week I thought it would be far-fetched to organise a protest, but he rubber-stamped it. But although I hope there's going to be thousands of people to go to Windsor on the 13th of June, it must be organised officially because do you think our right to protest may be stopped by the government for fear, it might escalate into violence or something? Because I hope not. But the Queen...
we will have to, if necessary, I'll do it myself. I'll do it with Scott, with Angus Scott. I'll do it with anyone of goodwill who wants to officially organise a protest, which of course would be a lawful one, would be a peaceful one, but a necessary one. I'm absolutely certain that thousands of people would come to it, especially in the summertime, especially in Windsor. May God preserve us long enough, Norma, to be on it ourselves.
Well, I can't hardly walk down the street, George.
Well, I'll push you in a chair if you're prepared to come.
Oh, that'd be lovely, yeah.
Well, there you are. That's a deal. If you come, I'll get a chair and I'll push you right at the front of that march.
That'd be great.
I think there's... Look, it's slightly tricky. Nobody wants to be throwing, insults or bad words at a 94-year-old woman in the twilight of her reign. But at the same time, we cannot allow this to pass, Norma.
No, I'm totally with you. But the thing is, she'll be 96 in April, actually. 96. And she's becoming fragile. And they may have the excuse that they want to protect her. That's what...
of course, we'll not be able to breach the walls of Windsor Castle, and we wouldn't try to. But we have a right to be in Windsor to make clear our disapproval of this heinous act, which disfigures British public life and besmirches the name of the monarch and the royal family itself. Now, while I've got you on, Norma, the Colston Four were acquitted in the court.
Yes, they were.
Tell us your feelings on that.
Well, my feelings are, there's a parallel with Tony Blair, because the fact that years and years ago, so many people came over from Western Africa and they drowned and they were killed. And
well, they didn't come over, they were dragged over in the holds of ships.
Well, they were like sardines, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that Tony Blair also had a war that wasn't right and thousands of people were killed, I think there are parallels there. Well done,
What's
Bristol.
the feeling in Bristol over their acquittal?
Well, over the whole thing, I get a feeling that people are very pleased. Of course, caution needs to be needed there, although they got off, and I'm pleased, because you cannot then give the okay to other people to start pulling down statues because of some political unrest. So there needs to be caution, but my God, I was happy.
Okay, Norma, thank you very much indeed for that. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, then do come back next week at the same time, in the same place, and do bring another viewer or listener with you. You can watch on a bewildering plethora of platforms now, from TikTok to Instagram to Twitter to Facebook to YouTube to Telegram to, what was that other one that I kept forgetting? Was it Twitch? Twitch, you can still watch on Twitch, and you can listen, of course, in the United States, on FM in DC, on AM, coast to coast. I bid you a very good night.